Tonight we want to open chronicles written in gold or sing the sagas of kings who forgot their own words. Instead, we'll step into a hall where silence itself has weight, a place where air cools not from winter but from reverence. Here, torches burn with the patience of watchmen, their light clinging to the carved pillars as if afraid to disturb the vows they've heard. The ring rests on folded linen, waiting without pride, the kind of gold that understands restraint. Around it, breath slows. Steps soften. Even the brazier hums in a lower key, as though it too remembers that some warmth must be earned. Every draft has been sealed, every bench aligned by a thumb's width. This is not preparation, it's ritual. A space designed not for spectacle, but for the quiet shaping of truth. The lawkeeper moves like someone writing a sentence in the air. The witnesses stand in their places like punctuation marks, steady and exact. So lower the lights a little more. Let the hush of the room spread through your chest until your heartbeat begins to sound like distant footsteps on stone. And if this quiet keeps you company for a while, stay as long as you like. The story will keep unfolding, whether your eyes stay open or drift closed before the last vow is spoken. If moments like these help you breathe a little slower, you're welcome to linger, to listen again another night. Stories of quiet courage have a way of finding those who move at their pace. The hall at Uppsala begins not with a shout, but with a breath that everyone pretends not to hear. The air cools, as if time itself takes a cautious step before entering. Shadows lean forward across the table, soft and deliberate, tracing the edge of a folded cloth where gold waits beneath its own reflection. Somewhere outside, a hinge settles, a quiet reminder that even doors have their own way of keeping oaths. Inside, no one speaks until the lawkeeper does. His hands hover above the ring, not to claim it, but to steady the space around it. The vow about to be sworn is older than the words that will carry it, older than the hall, older even than the gods, whose names will soon be whispered in the dark. And so the night holds its breath a little longer, listening for the first sound of a promise that knows how to wait. At midnight, the hall at Uppsala cools by its own discipline. The lamps burn small and steady, their light moving like a whisper over gold, linen, and oak. A rain of metal waits unfolded, cloth-polished, patient, and perfectly indifferent to the breathing of men. The air carries a faint trace of beeswax and smoke, the scent of hands that work without hurry. A lawkeeper checks the doors against drafts, then presses the folds of the linen flat with the edge of his palm. Nothing creaks, nothing shifts. Every corner of the room seems to remember what silence once meant before words learned how to promise. The gold does not shine for beauty, but for memory. It reflects the steadiness of the voice that will soon speak, and the weight of the listening that will follow. Outside, frost gathers on the eaves, and the moon watches with the patience of someone who has heard all vows before. Stories of quiet courage have a way of finding those who move at their pace. The hall begins not with motion, but with a held breath. The air lowers itself to listen, shadows lean across the table, and somewhere beneath the linen, the ring wakes to its duty. The lawkeeper counts witnesses the way a baker counts loaves. Not loudly, not with ceremony, just a quick glance that registers mouths that can repeat what they heard. The benches hold them in neat gravity. Names are checked against a tablet wrapped with a thin coat of wax, and a stylus with a blunt tip, the kind that carves memory without tearing, waits beside it. The ring's linen is new enough to be proud and old enough to be calm. A horn of ale sits capped and patient on the board, warm where the brazier's breath reaches, but not so warm that it will encourage speeches. The ring is lifted no higher than the chest. Anything above the heart invites pride to climb, and pride tends to talk over the details. The lawkeeper reps the inner curve of gold with his thumb and feels the small dents of older nights, each one a tiny meteor in the metal. The hall notices this the way a room notices someone closing a window. The moment becomes practical. Only 3 hands are expected near the ring: the keepers, the witnesses, and the hand that will meet the gold. Everyone else belongs to the quiet, which is important. A vow's first friend is silence. Its second friend is breath measured to match the length of the sentence. When the keeper nods, the one who will swear steps forward at the pace of a person entering a library. There is no drum, no trumpet, no smoky cloud indicating plot. There is a palm, slightly warmer than the metal, resting on the ring like a lid on boiling water. The witness stands close enough to hear breath between words, and far enough to be furniture, if that would help. If you are counting small, oddly comforting facts to stay awake, here are a few. The ring weighs a little less than a loaf. The table is planed so smooth that it reflects light like an idea, and the keeper, Espelt, has a notch for exactly the place where the cloth folds when the ring is set down. These are not essential to the vow, but vows appreciate scenery that has rehearsed. When the first sentence begins, the room agrees to hold it. The formula is old and straightforward. It doesn't try to impress anyone. A horn is raised and tilted so that one drop shines at the lip, a good reminder that someone is paying attention. A mind that knows it is watched tends to use fewer adjectives. The words use the future tense sparingly, as if it were fine porcelain. The present tense does most of the work, because today is where promises stand. The palm rests on the gold for each clause, then lifts slightly so the ring can cool. Breath is counted, not because numbers are mystical, but because people forget to inhale when they are busy being noble. The witness nods after each clause, not to approve, but to prove that sound became meaning. A tiny draft sneaks under the door and changes its mind when it meets the concentration. Somewhere in the rafters, a beam remembers a storm from 5 decades ago and decides not to creak in sympathy. The words are simple enough to repeat tomorrow, and strict enough to prevent embroidery. An oath prefers verbs you can point at: keep, pay, bring, tell, repair. There's a portion set aside for names, which are pronounced as if they might run away, and a place where the task is trimmed to something a human can lift. No one swears to improve all rivers. A person swears to carry a message along one bank by first light, and to return the horn before noon. The ring has a sense of humor about this, and seems to weigh a little more whenever someone tries to promise the moon. You may smile quietly. The ring will not report you. A formula like this is basically a good checklist in costume. It is the same as making tea correctly. Warm the vessel, measure the leaves, pour the water that has just stopped pretending to boil, wait the correct small forever, pour, breathe. If you can do that, you can do this. And if your eyes are heavy now, you can simply imagine the tea continuing without you. Every vowel contains a shadow clause that is not read out, but is understood by the furniture. It says, if the words turn untrue, the ring grows heavy and the road becomes narrow. The lockkeeper never mentions it. He does not need to. The witness does not flex their eyebrows. They do not need to. The shadow clause lives in the hinge of the door and in the way the benches make room for people who come back with either the horn or an apology. It is not a threat. It is just geography. In a village map, the streets are straight until you lie, and then they become stairs. The price of breaking a vow is not lightning. It is errands that do not get done because no one will lend you a broom. If you are still awake, this is an excellent place for a small private smile. Even thunder would be less inconvenient than a lifetime of doors that hesitate. There's another detail the ring insists on: a short prayer, not for drama, but so the gods will remember what the speaker may try to forget. The prayer is the length of an exhale. It asks Freyr to keep the weather reasonable because promises do not float well. It asks Thor to watch over hands that carry. It asks Odin to hold the memory of the witnesses steady, since memory likes to add spice when no one is looking. The horn taps the table once at the end, the way a teacher taps the board after writing the last word. Then everything waits for one heartbeat so the vow can find its shelf in the night. If you're still with us, you can file your own small vow on a shelf now. Something gentle. Something like, I will put the cup into the sink. That is a fine promise, and the night applauds very softly with the sound of cooling ashes. The second turn of the night belongs to the way power behaves when it wants to be useful, rather than impressive. The ring does not threaten. It disciplines the air. You can hear it in how chairs are moved, by lifting instead of dragging. When someone breaks their word, it does not trigger an orchestra. It merely changes the temperature a little whenever they enter, like a cloud passing in front of a lamp. People notice without deciding to notice. Oaths are social weather. Ning, the old insult that clings like damp wool, is not a shout here. It is a room that goes quiet. Gifts are passed around someone differently, and the dogs remember another yard. This is both gentle and relentless. The law can punish, certainly. It has a long arm and steady hands. But the village has even longer memory and more inventive pockets. It can store a quarrel for years without making space for it, and when someone needs help lifting a beam, their name might find itself in the near future column. If you're awake, you may consider that a very sustainable enforcement strategy. If you're asleep, you are already participating by being restful and therefore law-abiding. The ring's power also travels during the day disguised as ordinary politeness. Markets run on it. A measure of grain is trusted because last night happened. A boat leaves at dawn because the oarsman gave a sentence to the gold, and now the river expects company. Even the bread rises better. Yeast adores regularity. It believes in calendars. When vows are kept, the dough is confident. Bakers occasionally thank the ring under their breath without getting theological. The costs of falsehood show up not as lightning strikes, but as little frictions. A knot that will not untie. A latch that suddenly insists on exactness. A cloak clasp that prefers to forget its job. The world enjoys mirroring our moral math in ways that are either superstitious or obvious, depending on how sleepy you are. Either way, it works, and the benches approve. The gods are named during these nights in the precise order that steadies hands. Freyr's peace comes first because it is hard to keep a promise in a storm. Thor's steadiness comes next because moving stones out of fields is simpler when you feel like a stone yourself. Odin's memory arrives last, possibly because he likes to enter rooms after everyone has already told the story once. Their presence is not loud. It is not a torch flaring or ravens knocking. It is more like the moment a jar lid finally loosens because two people are holding it instead of one. The ring, according to the stories, once belonged to a table that belonged to a god before it belonged to a chieftain's chest. This genealogy is recited in a tone that feels like reading the return policy aloud. It sets expectations. To swear on the ring is to invite company you cannot dismiss from your event. Even very confident people speak softer when they learn how many listeners a promise has. After the vow, the night does not rush to end. There is paperwork to be done, though it would not recognize itself as such. A linen thread is knotted and pressed into wax on the tablet beside the names. The knot is the right size to be found later by fingers without eyes. The horn taps the table once again, less like a signal, more like a faint to wood. The ring returns to its folded linen, and the cloth receives it with a small breath. The keeper wraps the linen around the gold the way you might wrap a loaf you plan to share tomorrow. Nothing is locked like treasure. The ring is put away like a tool that will be needed again. People think of treasure as singular. A community has discovered that a promise tool must be ordinary to work. It cannot live in awe. It must live in cupboards and take part in laundry schedules. Witnesses step outside and remember that the world is larger than the room that made their words heavier. Cold air demonstrates this quickly. Breath becomes a temporary cloud. Clouds become evidence that bodies are practical miracles. Practical miracles become reasons to walk home. The person who swore the vow might linger at the threshold while the rest move aside. There's a short speech meant only for the doorframe. It does not quote poetry. It does not explain motives. It says what will be told and what will wait until morning. Sleep is requested like a tool borrowed from a neighbor to be returned in better condition. A rope is checked, a cartwheel is turned half a circle, a small reversible step is chosen. These gestures are not part of myth, so they rarely get sung. But they are the reason myths remain useful at breakfast. If you are awake, you might pick a small reversible step of your own. Place the shoe where tomorrow expects it. The ring will not mind if your promise is to a shoe. It respects commitments of any size. At first light, the ring will be red, which here means it is held up in the color of early day, and its scratches are treated like lines of a familiar book. People who know gold can tell which nicks belong to who and when. This is a local archive of honesty in miniature. The witness touches one mark with a fingertip and smiles in the quiet way people smile when they recognize their own handwriting from years ago. The lawkeeper checks the tablet and breathes in. The breath is the signature. Then everything resumes the slow speed of ordinary life. The ring is put back into custody, which is simply a respectable word for a cupboard in a responsible room. Nets are carried, bread is cut. A cart that thought it might deserve a day off learns that today is a working day after all, and no one argues. There are, woven into the day, little permissions that came from the night. If your vow was to speak to a person you have been avoiding, there is a rule for how to begin, with the weather, because both of you are already under it. If your vow was to fix a fence, there is a rule for breaking down the job. Set the first post and then drink water. Water makes many tasks possible without pretending to be heroic. If your vow was to remember a name, there is a rule for keeping it. Say it when you pick up a cup. Cups enjoy being part of memory. These are not in any law book, but they live in the habits of people who would like to see each other next year. The ring collects them the way a coat collects useful lint. Of course, not every promise thrives. Some days are more win than plan. The ring has expectations, but not cruelty. If you fail, you can try again. The trying is part of the pledge, and sometimes counts more than the outcome, a doctrine that will be familiar to anyone who has baked bread more than once. Apologies are available in pre-measured sizes. For small failures, the size of a nod. For heavier ones, the size of a broom in a morning. For the rare and clumsy kind, the size of a public bench cleaned while other people watch. None of these are dramatic, and that is the point. Drama burns fuel, vows run on repetition. By evening, the story has completed its circle and returns to the ring. The cupboard door opens with the self-confidence of a hinge that has been thanked. The cloth unwraps. The gold blinks once the way metal does when it meets a flame again after sleeping. The keeper examines the edge as if reading a weather line. He may talk to the ring under his breath, very ordinary things, like good work, or see you, or we have a busy week. The ring never answers, which is the most helpful thing it could do. An object that keeps quiet allows humans to hear themselves. The lamp wick is pinched down so the flame joins the ash rather than argues with it. A few footsteps cross the floor at the speed of thought becoming memory. The door closes with the sort of politeness that makes neighbors like each other. If you are still here, the night has offered you its smallest faculty, the ability to make a tiny promise on the way to sleep. It can be old and humble. I will rinse the cup tomorrow. I will look at the sky before I complain. I will carry the letter to the gate. These are much better than exciting vows, which are famous for losing their keys. You don't have to tell anyone. You can put a fingertip on the blanket and pretend it is gold. The blanket will enjoy the attention and probably sleep better. If drowsiness has already climbed into the room and settled on the edge of your bed like a patient cat, let it stay. You are doing the ceremony correctly. The stream of time in these halls is slow and it suits the work. The ring grows heavier by the ounce of trust added with each night. The wax tablet thickens with shallow, honest marks. The horn is washed and turned upside down so it will not dream of boasting. The benches rest from having held stories without judging them. The brazier cools as if it were closing its eyes because everyone else did first. In the rafters, the old beam finally creaks once, relieved that the promise has weight again. People at home wake in a few hours and find the small changes. A knot in a rope that was not there yesterday and is now very helpful, a door that opens with less argument, a broom leaning in a way that suggests it has become a member of the household council. The oath ring at midnight is not magic in the fireworks sense. It is magic in the inventory sense. It adds a cup here, a notch of wax there, a remembered name somewhere along a path, and soon there is a pattern that looks suspiciously like a town that knows how to live. If you are awake, let your breath match that inventory. Inhale one tool, exhale one shelf, inhale one sentence, exhale the long hallway where people return what they borrowed. If you are asleep, your breath has already enrolled in the program and is filing reports in a very neat hand. And so the room retires again to its quiet. The gold is wrapped, the tablet stacked, the horn cleaned, the witnesses folded into their beds like paragraphs that will make sense tomorrow. The night does not close with a conclusion. It simply places a comma where you might have expected a period. The hall waits for the next name, the next palm, the next sentence that will be measured by breath. Somewhere a gate that thought it was a law remembers it is only a gate and decides to swing a little easier. Somewhere a baker kneads dough with a new steadiness and believes the bread will cooperate. Somewhere the road is a little wider because a promise has learned to walk on it. If you are awake, you can listen to that road getting ready. If you are gone, the road has already set out a chair for you near morning, and the ring with all its small meteors keeps. The hour without hurry the same way good rooms keep their shape while you rest. You might not expect a watchman to start his shift by listening to a rock yet. Heimdall always does because the rock at the door of Himmelbjörg keeps a tidy memory of footsteps and announces the day with a feeling rather than a word. The house looks toward the edge where sky pretends to be sea, and the bridge that everyone calls a rainbow, but which is actually a very organized road size and faint colors as if it had lubricated its joints. The horn rests where it sleeps, wrapped in wool that swears it never tickles anyone. The lamps are shy, and even the wind is almost polite here, reaching up the cliff with salt on its mind and retiring without comment when it finds the gate closed. Heimdall touches the rock, and the rock, relieved to be consulted, returns. A soft hum that means nothing suspicious has gone by since dusk, except a fox that tried to become a cloud for a few minutes and then reconsidered. The watchman nods. He tests the hinge of the door with 2 fingers, not because he doubts the hinge, but because good doors like attention early. He taps the post twice with a knuckle to let the post know it will be involved. If you are still awake later, you may subscribe to this sort of housekeeping by tapping your day on the shoulder once or twice in the morning. If sleep interrupts before we reach the horn, nothing breaks, the shift simply proceeds without you in rights. Your name respectfully in the log as present by intention. Heimdall is technically the son of 9 mothers, which proves that even biographies can be a collection, and perhaps explains his habit of greeting every part of his job as if it raised him a little. He greets the sky first. Sky replies in its ancient dialect of gradual brightness. He greets the cliff, which prefers a short hello with the chin. He greets the sheep on the slope below because he can hear the grass organizing itself into lunch and they can tea. They chew in grateful ignorance. He greets the sea in a language of shoulder posture that says, "Thank you for not trying to climb the path today." He eats a working breakfast that would not impress a Poland bread with butter, a wedge of cheese that understands edges, and a drink the color of careful gold. His teeth are named Gull and Tanny because they keep a small light of their own, which is useful at night when he smiles at the logbook to keep the ink brave. He requires little sleep, less than a bird if the sayings are accurate, and he proves it by conducting a conversation with silence for an hour without yawning. He checks the horn, which is called Jallarhorn, but also, at this hour, responds to more domestic names like, "You great patient trumpet." He mends the strap that keeps it from wandering off during storms. He cleans its curve with a soft cloth dipped in oil that smells like a clean workshop, and the horn looks back at him with the satisfaction of brass that has been complimented. If you're in the mood to be gently persuaded into wakefulness, consider that somewhere there is a bridge being dusted by a man who can hear wool growing, and let that be enough to keep your eyes half open for another sentence or two. The first long look of the day belongs to the bridge. Bifrost is sometimes crowded with colors it borrowed from birds who were not done with them, and sometimes it is a pale road that forgot to be important. Today it keeps the polite glow of a path that knows visitors want to take pictures in their minds. Heimdall walks the length that can be walked without stepping on policy. He carries a broom whose bristles have been trimmed to the shape of obedience. He makes small corrections here and there that no one notices. A ripple of red coaxed into line, a blue smudge promoted to a stripe, a corner of green persuaded to stop looking like a door. He hums to the bridge, because bridges enjoy being reminded that music also spans distances. Down below, the human world wakes with its own clatter of pans and plans, and he hears all of it in the clear way a tall tree hears weather, without inheriting it. He can hear a needle mending a sleeve in a town that does not know where its mending goes, and the sound of a bucket whose handle intends to last one more season if praised appropriately. He listens to a conversation between two crows about a shiny thing that is actually a scale from a fish who refuses to be a metaphor. He smiles and adjusts the strap of the horn to the exact notch that means we are listening. Not alarming. If you're still with us, you can try this sort of attention in miniature. Notice one quiet thing near you, approve it silently, and then return to the main story as if you had dusted a small shelf in your head. Himmelberg is a house that keeps orderly hours. It gives late morning to maintenance and early afternoon to polite hospitality. The steps are swept in long, thoughtful strokes that make footpaths consider their behavior. The hearth is laid with wood that knows its grains by first names. On the wall hangs a board where the day writes itself in tidy chalk. Weather agreeable. Sea conversational. Travelers possible afternoon. Goats planning. Ravens uncertain, but in a good way. Heimdall sorts the small drawer of spacers used to keep the doors from announcing themselves. He polishes the hinges with something like a lullaby and something like a recipe. He levels the stool that was loyal last winter and slightly philosophical this spring. He takes the long cloth from its peg and lays it along the sill so the window will smile rather than squint at the light. He is not a god of housekeeping, but housekeeping insists on being part of guardianship, the way salt insists on being part of soup that wants to be delicious. If you are thinking that this sounds suspiciously like chores, it does. Immortal chores, to be precise. The only difference is that these chores can hear the grass grow, which gives them an unfair advantage in scheduling. Around noon, the wind climbs politely to the cliff and tries out 3 different temperatures. Heimdall chooses the middle one and files a note for later. Visitors may come today, he decides, because the bridge is behaving and the day is dressed for company. He sets up the small table near the gate where questions are weighed. The table has a groove down the middle for rolling pebbles when thinking, and 2 pebbles that once belonged to a river who had opinions about fairness. An arriving traveler will place a question in the groove. The pebble rolls, and the answer decides whether to walk out into the air or stay folded. If no one comes, the pebbles practice not being crows. Heimdall pours water into a bowl for the very old custom of learning a face from its reflection and then not judging it. The bowl thinks about reflecting the entire sky and then remembers to be modest. He keeps a basket with cookies whose ingredients include patience and an unadvertised quantity of cinnamon. Even guardians know the persuasive power of cinnamon, and also that travelers tell more accurate stories when chewing something that tastes like a well-mannered hearth. Afternoon arrives with the first footfall at the edge of the Rainbow Road. It is not loud. Good footsteps are rarely loud. A mortal climbs with the dignity of a person who won a small argument with a hill. Heimdall greets them with the sort of friendliness that keeps boundaries intact and puts anxiety in a chair. He asks whether the purpose of the visit is carrying, asking, or forgetting, because these are the three ordinary reasons to approach a divine address. The traveler admits they have brought a question and a gift. The gift is a small hammer carved from alder. Heimdall turns it over in his hand, appreciating that the wood has been learning to be polite since winter. He sets it on the table where gifts wait to become tools, then listens to the question the way a good roof listens to rain without leaking. The traveler wants to know whether a promise made on a moving boat counts. Heimdall answers by turning the bowl of water so the surface catches one piece of sun, and then letting the shine settle. Yes, he says, if the boat was moving towards something that continued to be there. Boats and vows both appreciate destinations. The pebble rolls left, which is the side of reasonable outcomes. He sends the traveler back with a blessing measured in the length of a tide, and one cookie measured in a grandmother's palm. If you're awake, you may borrow this answer for your own moving vessel's words, spoken toward a stable thing prefer to keep their shape. He hears more drift up from the world. A farmer calling a cow by a nickname, door, realizing it is about to be a door. Again, after winter, a child asking whether the moon is nailed to the sky or merely hired. He catalogs each sound by texture and returns his gaze to the bridge whenever the wind makes its throat-clearing noise. There are many rules of the threshold, but most reduced to manners. If you carry iron that has recently argued with a forge, you'll be asked to let it rest. If you carry a question that will not fit down the groove of the table, you will be asked to cut it into manageable slices and try again. If you arrive with too much story for your lips, there is a bench designed for story overflow. It is upholstered in the quiet of last winter, as snow, and located beside a small pot of time because time teaches narration to pause correctly. Heimdall hears a distant skull testing a verse about rain and moving the adjective 3 times until it thinks about its life. He silently approves. He has, like most good doorkeepers, a patient relationship with adjectives. When the afternoon softens, Heimdall inspects the horn more closely. Jallarhorn is a polite instrument that nonetheless promises to be heard by everyone when it insists, so it prefers to be prepared in case insisting becomes necessary. He unwinds the wool and rubs the mouth with a drop of oil. He breathes through it once only a kitchen breath, nothing operatic, and listens to how the sound climbs the house, checks its pockets for travel, and sits down on the roof to tie its sandals. Good, he says to no one and to the sound. He practices lifting it with one hand and then with the other, individual equality of arms being the difference between a signal and a surprise. He keeps a leaf pressed in the case that is shaped like the ear of the first bird who understood the horn, and he touches it with a finger because rituals remember kindness better than instructions do. You might wonder whether he ever plays a tune because the temptation must be there, but the answer is that he does not. He once blew a few notes that sounded like breakfast and regretted confusing the ravens. There is a rumor that Heimdall can hear wool growing on sheep. He smirks at this because it is true but unhelpful. What matters is that he can hear hesitation moving in a crowd like a ripple, and that he can tell by the crinkling of paper whether a letter will be read aloud or privately, or not at all. He listens for the small edge of panic that precedes a runaway fire and walks a circle around the house, as if his steps were water poured on a worry. The house believes him and calms. He checks the path stones, tapping each one with the shaft of the broom until they remember they are stones and not decorative opinions. He watches the horizon with the relaxation of a person who knows the horizon personally and trusts it to remain on the job. Evening begins to lay itself across the bridge in long, sensible rungs. Heimdall changes tasks without changing his face. He lights the lamps that must be lit, turns down the lamps that enjoy behaving in moderation, and blesses the wind for picking one direction and sticking to it. He writes in the ledger with a hand that respects corners. He notes visitors, one mortal with a gift and a boat question, one gull with an alibi, one breeze with an overconfident hat. He lists repairs, hinge content, latch discussing retirement but available through harvest, broom fully employed, cookie tin optimistic until tomorrow. He eats a second wedge of cheese because guardians guard against hunger also, and the cheese is a good citizen. If you are still awake, you can let this list become your list by accident. Write nothing down, just let your mind pretend it has. Lists, like bridges, can be walked without eyes if the feet believe. The night watch is the gentlest scene, and Heimdall treats it like tea that insists on a particular cup. He warms the inner air of Himmelbjerg with a few small tasks that do not announce themselves. He straightens the horn on its shelf, turning it so the curve complements the shadow. He ties back the curtain with a knot that will definitely remember how to be untied in the dark. He checks the door again because doors enjoy second opinions in the evening. He draws, with chalk, a small circle on the threshold that means cross here with inside voices. He sits, not in a chair of command, but on the step, which is where steps prefer you to sit if you wish to understand them. The cliff sends up facts from the sea, a fish that changed its mind at the last second and became a deeper fish. A wave that met the rock and introduced itself properly. A ship that has chosen to trust a star and is in the process of being right about it. He listens, not in case of danger, but because listening is half of keeping. People imagine night at the edge of the bridge as silence, but it is more like cooperation. Frogs try their songs and then accept the edit. The grass stops making growth noises and dreams of dew. The sheep perform a little inventory of themselves and forget the number somewhere after the 7th. Cloud switch shifts with the dignity of attendance. A moth offline from all ambition chooses the lamp near his elbow and practices being a moon for 14 seconds, which is a respectable career. Heimdall's eyes are open, but they rest. He turns his hearing down to the setting labeled harmless and lets the world arrange itself like plates after supper. If you are still here, this is the moment to participate by doing almost nothing extremely well. Breathe in the thought of a guard who can hear a pillow filling with sleep. Breathe out the thought of being the pillow. Midnight does not require ceremony, but accepts one. Heimdall stands, touches the rock by the door again, and asks quietly what the rock has learned since morning. The rock reports the passage of coolness and the visit of a beetle with deadlines. He places his hand flat against the door as if measuring daylight with memory. He thanks the broom for its steadfastness. He thanks the horn for its restraint. He thanks the bridge for being willing to be a road and not just a rumor. He thanks the sea for staying where seas do their best work. He thanks his 9 mothers as a group and individually for inventing a guardian who loves housekeeping. He drinks a last sip of the careful gold and sets the cup down with the softest sound, which in this house means perfect. If a crisis should come, we would not be here together like this. We would be elsewhere, and the horn would be louder than kindness. But in this bedtime corner of the world, the crisis is simply how to be ordinary in a place that expects lyric poetry. Heimdall solves it by practicing the lyricism of exactness. He measures the path with the size of his foot and finds that it is still the correct path. He judges the air against his own shoulder and concludes that the wind has chosen mercy for the next hour. He checks the latch by closing it and then opening it and listening for evidence of opinions. There's no debate tonight. He counts the stars by the number of things he can forgive with the help of each one, and he runs out of unforgiven things before he runs out of stars. He makes a note, forgiveness inventory healthy. If you have made it here, you may leave your mind on the step for a while. The house will watch it. You can sleep while your thoughts sit upright and count goats with the sheep, which is statistically rigorous and also adorable. If you have already gone, your thoughts have been offered a blanket and a view of the sea, and are currently pointing out constellations that are not officially recognized, but are accurate in a neighborly way. Heimdall's head inclines, not quite a nod, more like a punctuation mark that knows its job. The knight leans closer as if to hear how quietly a world can hum when guarded by someone who likes to polish hinges. Heimdall does not conclude anything. He lets the hours keep their shape and does not ask them to end. The bridge learns how to be sleeping light. The horn dreams of announcing spring with a tone so round it would remind geese of good decisions. The door enjoys being a door, which is a relief after centuries of metaphor. The sea continues practicing generosity in the oldest meter. The rock holds its little hum in case anyone asks. And the watchman, the one with the gold teeth and the 9 beginnings, sits in the doorway of a house that understands thresholds and listens to the small applause of waves against patience, waiting without hurry for morning to make the world visible again in the exact places you left it. You might not expect immortality to smell faintly of clean straw and apple skins yet. Idun's morning begins in a storeroom where the air is cool and slightly sweet the way a page is cool when you first turn it. She keeps the apples of staying young, not young again in shallow trays lined with woven reeds that never scratch. The trays have names, which is very apple of them, and the names are painted in tidy strokes that look like the handwriting of someone who has never hurried. A door opens to a meadow with a fence polite enough to stop sheep, but not birds. And beyond the fence, a small orchard leans toward a stream that minds its own business until asked to taste a bucket. Idun steps onto the flagstones in shoes that do not scold the ground and greets each tree with a palm to the bark the way you greet an old friend who still answers postcards. The trees return greetings by adjusting their leaves so Light can sit down. She carries a basket that has been oiled with patience and a little beeswax, because baskets enjoy being reminded that life is mostly carrying things just heavy enough to justify a handle. If a few minutes from now you are still awake, you may subscribe to her method by nodding at whatever you plan to carry today. If you drift off, the basket will keep nodding for you and not take it personally. The orchard maintains a schedule that is not written but could be: mornings for listening, middays for sorting, afternoons for visitors who bring curiosities and leave with recipes, evenings for counting by smell. Idun listens first. Apples have accents. Some sound like crispness preparing to be polite, others like honey practicing its inside voice. She knows which ones are ready by the way the stem lets go with the hum of a doorknob, agreeing to be a doorknob. She never pulls. She waits, then receives, which is a kind of magic that does not embarrass anyone. The dew on the grass behaves like well-trained punctuation, commas drying into periods where the sun touches them. Bees inspect her sleeves as if she were a small flowering shrub in good standing. They approve her use of linen, which holds a vocabulary of air. Bragi, who is married to her and to poetry, leaves a verse on the fence post in the form of 2 lines of string tied at competent angles. She reads it later by gently untying. Somewhere above, Radcasser the squirrel argues with a rumor, and the rumor argues back by dropping a miniature cone onto a philosophical stump. Idun looks up, smiles, and writes in her mind's ledger: tree gossip, active, harmless. She picks 3 apples that smell like speeches prepared by sensible people, and 2 that smell like weddings that will be remembered for the bread. Into the basket they go, bedded in straw that has been informed of its honor. Inside the cool room, she studies each apple the way a healer studies a pulse. The shelves are adjusted by the width of a leaf from season to season because apples like company but not crowding. She polishes a blush with a cloth that has outlived 4 harvests and still believes it is young. The cloth has a corner embroidered with a tiny rune meaning enough, which is Adun's favorite measurement. On the long table lie her tools: a small knife with an honest edge, a brush made from the softer type of goat hair that thinks it is a cloud, a clay bowl for washing that remembers a river every time it is filled, and a narrow book with wooden covers that record which tree flirted with which kind of weather. The book is written in a blended script of notes and drawings, so modest that even the drawings feel like they are taking shorthand. She notches the stem of the apple that will be eaten soon and ties a discreet thread around the one that has ambitions for next week. Apples of youth are not identical to market apples. They keep time for the gods instead of calendars, so Idun treats them like minutes with flavor. She places one on a little scale because scales enjoy being included in sacred routines, and the tray sighs with satisfaction as the needle settles where it likes to rest. If you're still listening, you are doing the job of the scale. If you've drifted, the needle will pretend to have consulted you. Before noon, she walks the path to the beehives with a jar of clean water and a spoon of patience so the hives can choose a mood. The bees prefer to work their own debates out, but they accept the water as if it were a footnote that saved an argument. Idun compliments the architecture bees do not require praise, but it expresses well in honey, and in return they ignore her gently, which is how bees say you are trusted. She notices a lemony scent in the air that means the weather is thinking kind thoughts, not about you personally, but about everyone. She carries this weather back to the room on the sleeves of her dress like invisible lace. A small kettle hums on a low flame that has decided not to show off. She softens wax, pours a thumbprint of it onto a strip of cloth, and seals a note to herself. Afternoon, red tray, second row, 3 apples for Thor, 1 for a messenger who looks like he has forgotten his own birthday. The wax cools into an oval that resembles the moon when the moon has been paying attention. She sets it in the ledger under a page headed Ordinary Miracles. It is not a joke. Most miracles fall under that heading when you see them daily and they still work. Idun eats like a person who understands the politics of food bread that behaves. Cheese that holds its shape under discussion. A pear that has been practicing roundness since spring. Bragi sits at the doorway with his harp tuned to kindness and tells her a new line about the way time visits, not as a guest or landlord, but as a neighbor who always carries the correct screwdriver. She laughs the exact amount the line deserves, which is 2 notes worth, and returns to the shelves. She removes a tray and tests the apples for their conversation with the room. Some fruits develop the quiet of libraries, others the hush of snow deciding where to land. These she sorts to the lower shelves where stillness gathers. Apples that still chat about sunlight go to the higher places. She wants them to watch the light until they're satisfied. She writes a short private review of each tray, brisk, contemplative, citrus opinionated, because later, when the gods arrive, she will choose with the calm of someone who has tasted every sentence before speaking. After midday, the first visitor arrives. It is a god who will remain unnamed because she prefers that her hunger be nobody's business. Idun offers a slice in a shallow bowl that thinks it is fancy only on its day off, and the goddess bites and immediately forgets 2 unhelpful grievances. Apples are a known cure for the ache of unnecessary memory. Idun does not say this aloud. The bowl does the reminding with the way it holds the slice. The goddess pays with a story about a field that learned grammar from crows a plow. A pause, a line, a turning, then leaves with a second slice wrapped in a polite leaf. Idun notes the exchange in the ledger with the symbol of 2 crossed twigs that means remedy delivered, drama avoided. This symbol appears frequently, which is a good report card for immortality. Ratatoskr appears next because gossip travels on small feet and asks whether applewood makes good messages. Idun taps the table twice in the language of large squirrels and explains, That apple wood makes excellent handles for tools that tell the truth. As for messages, the best ones are carried by voices that don't shout. Ratatosker looks disappointed but respectful. He asks for a seed to plant somewhere that will surprise a troll. Idun chooses one from a jar kept at the back of the shelf where seeds think they are in a museum. She presses it into his paw and gives him a string for remembering to water it. String remembers more reliably than promises. He zips off, stops, zips back, and thanks her with a compliment on the orchard's taste in fences. Squirrels are connoisseurs of boundaries. The afternoon in the orchard behaves like a page turning slowly. Idun visits the tree that leaned too far last year and tells it a short story about a hill that learned to sit up straight. The tree adjusts by less than a finger, which is enough. She checks the skeps and replaces a roof that had thoughts of falling asleep sideways. She walks to the stream and lets 3 apples drink for a count of 50 heartbeats, because sometimes fruit wants to remember where it came from. The stream obliges with a pleasant chill and no lectures. On the way back, she meets a small wind running an errand for no one in particular. She steps aside to let it pass and wishes it good traveling. The wind, relieved to have been seen, stops trying to knock hats off of anything for the next hour. Inside again, she sets up for the portion of the day that resembles a shop and feels like a conversation. The doorway stays open to invite footsteps that don't need to be brave. Mortals visit now and then, led by a path that pretends to be confused until it isn't. She sells nothing, there's nothing to sell but shares slivers and advice, and sometimes a nap on the bench by the wall, because the bench is sympathetic to gravity. A fisherman once traded her a story in which his net caught a sunset and let it go without claiming heroism. In return, she taught him to keep an apple near the oars to sweeten complaints. Today, a woman from a farm brings a basket of plums that have ambitions to be kind, and asks how to teach her trees not to panic when hail considers an appearance. Idun demonstrates a simple charm involving a shawl and a tone of voice. The woman tries it and discovers she already knows the tone. Idun offers her 2 apple seeds in a little envelope with a leaf printed on it. The woman leaves smiling as if someone just polished the day. A curious raven lands on the sill and peers inside, wondering whether the apples contain prophecies. Idun replies that they contain vitamins and stories, which is almost the same thing if you eat correctly. The raven accepts the peel and flaps off, reconsidering its career in prophecy to focus on small fortunes rather than big ones. Brogi, who has been competent in the background, writes down one line about the raven and another about how baskets are the original poems because they carry form before content. He plays softly a music that resembles good weather. Idun keeps working. She is not a healer or a lawgiver or a warrior. She is a person who helps time remember how to be gentle, and this requires trays, cloths, ledgers, and the moral support of bees. When evening begins, the light grows friendly and the room learns how to be a lantern. Idun checks each shelf the way you check each chair before guests arrive, not for comfort, for confidence. She sets a single candle far back on the board, so the flame's thoughtfulness reaches the apples without burning pride into them. She moves 3 trays lower so older gods will not have to reach high in the morning. She writes little tags in a tidy hand. The ink smells of the kind of bark that tastes like reading, and ties them to stems, not tight, just near. She selects 6 apples for the early round tomorrow and places them in a small chest lined with cloth, the color of dawn on good days. She locks nothing. Locks are for things people don't trust themselves around. No one here wants to be that person about breakfast. She steps outside for the evening walk that keeps the orchard streams polite. Grass agrees under her shoes. The sky thinks about stars and then commits. She passes the shed where baskets sleep and ensures the door has no plans to squeak at night. Doors are proud creatures, and squeaking is often just anxiety. She pauses by the fence and thanks it for understanding the difference between invitation and escape. The stream practices a paragraph about stones, revising line breaks based on frog feedback. Idun listens with her whole body the way you listen to a story that has never failed you. She gathers a handful of mint and tucks it into her pocket, because pockets appreciate aromatherapy as much as people do. On the hill, a patch of clover conducts a vote and decides to smell greener tomorrow. Back in the room, she arranges little plates in one generous bowl because the gods like choices, even when all choices are correct. She counts the clean spoons, not with anxiety, but with affection for the small metal friends who help stories into mouths. She wipes the long table with a cloth dampened by water that thinks it used to be a cloud, and still tries to be helpful. She sets aside a slice for the night watch, because there's always a night watch somewhere and is nice when someone remembers. She writes one last note in the ledger: be as patient, stream cooperative, win teachable, trays unanimous. The ledger nods in the dim light, self-satisfied the way a good book is when it contains nothing scandalous and everything necessary. As full dark settles, the storeroom develops the soft authority of a library that smells like food. Apples breathe politely. The reed trays exhale the memory of summer barns. The candle lowers itself as if demonstrating humility to students. Idun washes her hands in the clay bowl and dries them on a towel that became exceptionally soft by minding its own business over many years. She sits on the bench and unknots Brage's poem from the fence string, which says, "When you keep time in fruit, it ripens differently in people." She smiles and places the string in a jar with other makeshift poems, because jars also enjoy literature. Somewhere a small owl approves without taking a position. You might be wondering whether the apples ever try to be dramatic. They do not. They prefer to be accurate. The gods do not become younger. They become less frayed. Knees remember how to be stairs. Eyes remember the color of patience. Tempers remember where the shallow end is. Idun's work is maintenance disguised as sweetness, which is why so many visitors leave believing they were fed when, in fact, they were calibrated. She does not say this. She says, "Have another slice," and a second slice turns complaints into plaques for invisible walls, the ones that keep roofs from arguing with rain. If you are still awake, this is the moment to borrow one of Idun's rules. Choose a small thing to store kindly. It could be tomorrow's sentence, or a cup you intend to use when morning apologizes for being early. Put it where air can find it and where your hand will be already on its way without having to think. If sleep has already found you, she approves. Nothing ripens better than a person who has agreed to stop talking for a while. The orchard accepts your absence like a shelf accepts a clean plate. Night deepens. Brage hums something that might be a lullaby, or might be the house settling a fraction of an inch closer to perfect. The bees rest like coins in a purse that knows not to jingle. The trees loosen the day from their shoulders and put on the shawl of dark that makes everyone kinder. The stream chooses a tempo designed to escort thoughts to bed. Idun checks the latch, not because anyone will come, but because latches adore interviews. She covers the chest of morning apples with a cloth that remembers centuries of dawns and promises another one. She closes the ledger with the weight of a smooth stone and sets the stone to guard it, which is ceremonial and also adorable. Nothing ends. The room simply keeps its shape while you fall asleep. The orchard continues its friendly breathing, and the apples shine with that quiet starlight that fruit learns from windows. Somewhere beyond the fence, a hedgehog writes its nightly review of the path with the decisiveness of a tiny critic. Its only complaint is a leaf that tried to be dramatic and failed. The gods dream of breakfasts that make the day behave. Idun dreams of trays arriving exactly when they are needed and of seeds finding their versions of the future. And you, somewhere between the reed baskets and the stream's careful grammar, drift in the sensible sweetness of a world that puts things on shelves and remembers them in the morning. You might not expect to see God to begin the day by brushing sand from a chair, but Nodger does, because at no time the chairs face the tide, and the tide returns small portions of itself as gratitude. The harbor wakes with a kind of organized yawn. Ropes stretch, boats remember their names, gulls arrange their opinions into flight paths. The wind arrives with a list of suggestions, and in a mood both breezy and bureaucratic, pins the list to the morning. Jared reads it without haste. He wears a simple coat that has tasted salt enough times to have firm beliefs, and boots that understand the difference between wet and willing. He taps the pier with a knuckle so the wood can be included, and the wood approves with a low note. If you're still awake a little later, you can subscribe to Harbor membership by tapping the nearest thought before you use it. If sleep arrives before we inventory the shells, that's fine too, because the tide will keep careful minutes on your behalf. He always begins with the winds. It is not obvious to land people that winds also need chores, but they do, and they behave better when given a schedule. Jared stands on the outer planks of the jetty and greets them by the names fishermen use when nobody is listening. The patient one that carries bread smells, the forgetful one that leaves hats where it found them, the proud one that knows exactly how far gulls can act important. He unrolls a ribbon of blue cloth, not ceremonial, just convenient, and ties 3 loose knots that mean today we prefer a steady hand. Knots are fluent in suggestions. The wind takes note and leans into the day, as if pushing a door open with its shoulder. Nets that slept in tidy piles unfold in their dreams. The harbor hums. Jared smiles with the soft satisfaction of a man whose office is salt and light. He tastes the air as if it were broth and decides it needs a pinch more west. He whistles the appropriate reminder. A west obliges by straightening a flag to the correct angle, which in this harbor is the angle at which a boat thinks about leaving but decides to drink its tea first. Along the seawall is a shelf of stones that work as a calendar if you know the dialect. Jared sets a new stone at the corner to mark the particular promise of this tide, a rounded gray with a line through it like a careful scratch. The shelf appreciates the addition and shifts its weight gently to make space. He writes the day's first note in the harbor ledger, which is kept in a waterproof wrapper that has learned the art of terrace folding. The entry is short and calm. Wind polite, waves teachable, boats discuss. He draws a tiny fish in the margin so the page will not feel lonely. At the door to the boathouse, he straightens a sign that simply says, "Leave with something and return with something," which is the entire ethic of sailing written in a friendly voice. If you are still here and practicing being calm, you can adopt the sign for your own errands. The boathouse smells like pine that kept a respectable distance from storms. Oars sleep on pegs, paired by temperament rather than size. The impulsive pair near the door, the reflective pair farther and where shadow is good for thinking. A rack holds the hooks that understand nets, like good teachers understand nervous students. Jared takes a coil of rope and lays it on the floor the way a librarian lays a book, not dramatically, not lazily, but with respect for future use. He oils the metal fitting on a tiller until it remembers how to be quiet. Tools like to be reminded, gently, that they are part of a long plan. On the bench sits a wooden box divided into spacious rectangles, cork floats sorted by how readily they admit mistakes, spare cleats with the posture of helpful mules, and a tin of nails that knows they will be asked to hold more than timber. He replaces the lid with a soft sound that says, "I will see you soon," and means it. Outside, the first visitors of the day arrive without fanfare. 2 seals haul themselves onto the flat rock and pretend not to require hospitality. Jared offers them exactly the right amount of attention. He notices, and then he goes about his work. Seals like that kind of welcome. A boy from the village brings him a polite problem. The sail on his father's boat has developed a memory. It keeps trying to return to yesterday's wind. Jared holds the cloth between his hands, listens to the faint stiffness, and instructs the boy to roll it the other way around a smooth pole at sunset to teach it a new story about direction. He demonstrates with a ribbon and a practical patience that makes even the gulls flatter their wings into thoughtfulness. The boy looks relieved, as though a hill has learned to be a staircase. He leaves with a biscuit from Jared's pocket that tastes of oats and the sort of advice that behaves like hunger prevention. Mid-morning belongs to driftwood and shells, which at Note 10 are counted the way a gardener counts rain, not for strict tally, but for character. Jared walks the gently sloping beach with a basket. The basket is sturdy the way a good sentence is sturdy, capable of carrying specifics without spilling. He puts in wood that can be planed into a bench leg, and wood that can only be a story told beside a fire, and wood that has already been a story and needs to rest. Shells are inspected for their attitude toward listening. The best shells keep both their elegance and their humility. He chooses a handful to place among the stones on the calendar, for ornament and for tidings. A mussel shell with a scratch like a letter is tucked into his coat. It will become a bookmark in the ledger later, and the ledger will sit up a little straighter because of it. He picks up a bit of sea rope, previously employed by a storm, and repurposes it into a handle for the boathouse door. A harbor uses what a harbor is given, but it uses it neatly. Behind the boathouse stands a short row of poles where nets take the sun as medicine. Jared spreads one carefully, step by step, checking the knots the way a sleepy teacher checks homework, looking not for errors but for misunderstandings. He mends a gap with his bone needle and a confidence that belongs to hands practiced on breezes. The needle glides through the cord with the courtesy of a fish that knows the river by every bend. As he works, he hums about the weather in a key reserved for working songs that never intend to be famous. If you are still awake and enjoy collecting microfacts, here's one that belongs in a pocket. Jared can tell the difference between a knot tied at noon and a knot tied at dusk by the way it argues. Noon knots explain, dusk knots remember. By late morning, he visits the small shrine near the far pier. It is not grand, just a carved post with a cup for fresh water, a little shelf for offerings that do not spoil, and a bell that prefers to be rung once thoughtfully rather than many times enthusiastically. Someone has left a ribbon of sailor's blue tied with admirable evenness, and someone else has left 2 pebbles that match in a way pebbles appreciate. Jared contributes a coil of twine labeled Tomorrow because tomorrow loves supplies. He tilts the cup and refreshes the water so that whoever stops to drink will taste the new day. Shrines and ports are less about worship and more about courtesy between the living and the weather. He takes off his cap for the amount of time it takes a small wave to find the shore and then puts it back on at the angle that means business with kindness. Midday shares a long table with sorting. The ledger is opened. The mussel shell takes its place as a marker and pretends to be a tool with an important job. The ledger pretends to believe it. Jared writes today's vessels in a calm list. Herring Luck, Green Sister, the small rower with the red oars, who has not yet chosen a name, and marks their errands in a code that looks like breeze diagrams. He chooses a generous nip from the cup and dips it in ink that smells faintly of the pier after the rain has rehearsed. His handwriting walks like a man accustomed to planks. The page receives weather, responsible but not gossipy. In the margins, he sketches a knot whose geometry has been politely solved. If you are still listening, imagine your own day written in such letters. See how the sharp corners turn humane. After the ledger, he opens the lunch basket. It has been prepared with the thoroughness of someone who has fielded storms and also arguments about sauces. Bread with a sensible crust, cheese that negotiates with salt but never loses, an apple cut into quarters so the mind may count and chew simultaneously. He eats while repairing a small crack in the thwart of a skiff, which means that hunger and usefulness shake hands at the center of the day. A cat arrives, theoretically wild, but clearly on the payroll, and performs the important audit of crumbs. The cat sits on the ledge as if serving on a board of harbor directors and votes for a nap. Jared accepts the motion and closes his eyes for a stretch of heartbeats measured to the shadow's patient creep. Nothing urgent happens. That is the point. Afternoon arrives with jobs that prefer sunlight. He visits the far sandbar where an obliging post allows lines to be tested without drama. He pulls and listens until each fiber answers what the small honesty ropes are famous for. A woman from the village walks out with a bucket of paint the color of reason. Together they paint the edge of the pier where habit and hurry occasionally overstep. The brush behaves. The line is straight. They talk in short sentences about fish behavior, which is to say they compliment the fish for being consistent in their inconsistency. When the line dries, the pier looks like it has remembered a safer way to be itself. She thanks the god with bread for tomorrow. He thanks the woman with the trick for persuading a stubborn latch to cooperate using only a glance and a humming noise. The exchange is fair, because even the sea likes a story. Jared hosts a little court on a bench near the mooring, posts for questions that would like to be solved before they grow into sagas. A boy wants to know if a boat knows when it is loved. Jared tells him that boats sense careful hands and answer by pointing their noses correctly at dawn. A fisherman wonders whether lowering a sail while swearing at the wind makes it faster or simply louder. Jared suggests that the wind, like a relative at a feast, becomes more reasonable when offered a seat rather than a lecture. The court adjourns without thunder. Someone has brought dried fish wrapped in paper with a pattern of waves. It is passed around and improves several opinions. If you are still awake, you may hold your own little bench court within and decide 3 cases in favor of patience. The tide turns as quietly as a thought deciding to be kind. Nets are gathered, wanting to be folded exactly the size of their future. Jared coils lines with a rhythm that also folds sleep. The technique is identical, which is why harbors doze so well. He checks the anchors by their inner arguments. Good anchors carry very little debate around with them. He adjusts the bell rope so the night breeze will ring it only when it has something to say. The sun drifts toward the far line where sky adopts sea like a very tall friend. He wipes a bench with a cloth that has heard 1,000 stories and yet still dries quickly, which is the mark of a professional. Visitors in late afternoon include a gull with paperwork, by which I mean it drops a shell that resembles a seal, and an old sailor who brings a polished stone in exchange for a rumor about tomorrow's swell. Jared takes the stone as if it were a question and answers by pointing at the place where distant water practices. For morning, the rehearsal of faint shiver you could miss if you didn't have a god for a neighbor. He says that tomorrow will be tidy weather if people behave like people who like their roofs. The sailor nods with the relief of someone who has lived inside roofs long enough to count their opinions. They exchange a polite salute made of wrist and glance. This is a language for old professionals. And since we are collecting small harbor facts, here is one more. A good forecast is a blessing disguised as a chore list. When evening finds the pier, Jared lights the lamps that enjoy being lamps and leaves the lamps that prefer contemplation. He unlocks the small weather chest and takes from it the cloth strips that mark the channel edge for boats upon boats that believe in their own competence. He ties the strips at intervals along the poles until the channel glows like cautious handwriting across the dusk. He checks the mooring knots, not distrusting, just greeting, and the knots answer with the confidence of clams. He lays the clean oars where morning will expect them. He sweeps the boathouse with long, comfortable strokes, guiding sand to the door and out into its native democracy. The broom is a journalist. It moves truth to where it belongs. Night does not arrive at Noton. It circulates. The tide breeze in its robe of reflected stars. The cat returns from board business and explores the laps of the men who have decided that benches are adequate proof of civilization. A kettle writes a soft letter to the air. Jared opens the ledger again and adds a last line that reads, "Win polite all day, One wave undecided, resolution in process. He presses the mussel shell into a fresh page, so tomorrow will begin with a question that has already met an answer. He touches the post as a carpenter touches what he has built. He thanks the wood for choosing to be useful rather than merely decorative. He thanks the sand for permitting footprints and deleting them with equal grace. He thanks the wind for accepting the naughty suggestion and not turning the harbor upside down just because it could. The thanking is not grand. It is the sound of boots on planks, the slight lift of shoulders, the near laugh of breathing. If you're still awake, you can borrow a Unjured habit for the road to sleep. Pick one ordinary hinge somewhere in your room and mentally oil it. Doors adore compliments, and minds do too, especially the kind made of gestures. If you're already gone, the harbor has filed your presence as favorable weather and will continue the shift gently. The way a friend continues a sentence for you when you pause and forget what it was. The first quiet of night belongs to the lines that stretch a little as the cool instructs them. Ropes settle into their evening grammar. Nets rest from arithmetic. The water hums a kind of housekeeping song in which each ripple is a cloth and each star a clean spoon. Jared walks to the far end of the pier, not to inspect, but to belong. He stands where the sea turns its pockets out and shows him shells and moon fragments, and the receipt for a gull. A mistake. He listens for distances, a bell on a different shore sounding like a small debt paid, waves on a reef practicing removal of hurry, a river trying to be a story before it goes to sleep. His hearing is not supernatural in the way of muscled miracles. It is professional. He hears hope in the way oars are stacked. He hears contentment in the posture of boats. He hears worry in a knot and solves it with 2 fingers and the word there. He sits at last on the chair he brushed at dawn, the chair that has waited all day to keep its appointment with weight. It holds him as if it remembers every previous appointment, which it does. He folds his coat across its back like a tide lying down. He drinks the last of the kettle, which tastes like a harbor that does not need to prove itself to anyone. The stars are generous, and the moon is engaged in the hobby of polishing water. A fish jumps for the same reason someone checks a window latch before bed: assurance. The seals on the rock make the contented huff of colleagues who have solved the last problem on the docket and are turning toward pillows. Somewhere, a child in the village, tired from carrying a conversation with the wind sleeps with the sail rolled the opposite way, and will wake with a sense that directions can be negotiated. This will be useful for the rest of their life. Jared closes the ledger, tucks the mussel shell inside, and sets the book where cats cannot annotate it with their tails. He ties the 3 blue knots on the ribbon into one soft heart. That means we will try the same plan tomorrow, slightly better. He lowers the bell clapper with a short length of cord, so that night breezes will have to ask politely. He arranges the oars in pairs as if matchmaking. These 2 like to argue and make up. Those 2 prefer to row in silence, and leaves them to their stable romances. He sweeps the last of the sand out of the boathouse with a small flourish entirely for his own amusement. The harbor enjoys a god who allows himself exactly 1 flourish. There is no conclusion here, only the long, respectful pause that good places keep between breaths. The tide meets the shore like bread that will be delicious in the morning. The wind folds itself into a compact thought and tucks in behind the dunes. Nets sleep like retired handwriting. The cat patrols once and reports to the bench that everything is as it should be. People in houses, boats on lines, moon on water, gulls reconsidering their day. Jared rests his hands on his knees and regards the dark as a colleague, not a stranger. He has arranged the small things so the large things will be calm. He has behaved as if order were a form of love, which at harbors it is. If you remain, your breath can follow the gentle tug of the moorings, in, out, and out, while the sea and the god share the night shift, and the world makes no demands except the soft one it always makes. Keep and return, keep and return, keep and return. until morning opens the ledger to a new page, and the first gull pretends to be the author of daylight. You might not expect the Queen of the Skies to begin her morning by checking a basket of clothespins, yet Frigg does, because a basket that starts the day in order makes the clouds easier to persuade. In Fensalir, the air keeps a clean, linen sort of quiet, the kind that smells faintly of soap that has never felt rushed. Light moves across the floor like someone practicing a curtsy. The Great Hall is dignified, yes, but the dignity is friendly. Even the tapestries look like they would hold a corner for you if you needed both hands for something else. Frigg ties back the window curtain with a simple knot that will remember how to untie itself later, the way good knots do. She touches the rim of the wash tub as if greeting a coworker, and the tub answers with a small ring, which is the sound iron makes when it approves of a plan. If you remain awake, you can adopt her method and greet one tool before using it. If sleep arrives first, the tub will greet you on your behalf and place your name neatly on the list of people who meant well today. Her washing day is not what mortals imagine. The water in Frigg's basin is not stolen from rivers. It is borrowed from mist that has finished a night shift and wants to be useful in a different form. Steam lifts itself with courteous confidence, and when she stirs in herbs crushed between patient fingers, the steam takes on the smell of meadow after a wise rain. She doesn't wash garments so much as moods. She soaks the hems of worries until their dye calms, wrings out conversations that dried in the wrong shape, and lays decisions flat so they will not twist when worn. The clothespins, carved from hawthorn a little too proud of its thorns, have been sanded until even pride is smooth. She lines them along the rim like soldiers who understand that standing still can be heroic work. Frigg hums in a key that gives steam better posture. On her table lies a stack of folded cloud cloths, thin as breath and strong as a promise that has been kept 3 times. She will launder a few and ease a few and hem a few, because the sky never stops growing and occasionally needs its edges reminded of themselves. Outside, the drying grain waits with the patience of grass that has seen every weather and learned manners from each of them. The posts for the lines are plain ash, rubbed with oil until they feel confident about the future. A pair of swans drift near the bank as if evaluating the schedule, and a wain from the north exercises in place to warm itself up to a gentle. Frigg carries the first basket with the focus of a person who enjoys tasks that finish. She clips the cloud claws in place and gives each one a tidy snap, a sound like a letter agreeing with its stamp. When a cloth catches the sun, it thickens into a small, nap-sized cumulus. And when it lies thin, it becomes the sort of cirrus you see above fields where farmers have recently nodded. She arranges them by season. Spring clouds get room to become curious. Summer clouds are mentored by shade. Autumn clouds spend more time with history and end up with good manners. Winter clouds are folded in thirds, so they remember how to be blankets. It is not meteorology so much as hospitality. On the porch near, the washtub hangs the pin bag made from the sleeve of a garment that finally admitted it had retired. The bag knows its work and makes no fuss. Inside, Frigg has tucked a small stone, smooth as agreement, which keeps the bag in a good mood on breezy days. She checks the mending basket, needles threaded, thimbles commencing, the pincushion pricked with tiny runes that mean separate, then gather, which is how stitches behave. She tests the edge of a pair of shears by listening to how the blades meet. A clean meeting sounds like 2 sensible people agreeing to share a bench. Satisfied, she cuts 3 cloud claws to the measure of tomorrow's weather, which is written to her kindly requesting variety. The letter is invisible but legible to hands. In a small jar, she keeps buttons made from mother of pearl that thinks it is still inside the sea. Buttons are for securing the corners of fog so it does not wander off and forget its job. She buttons fog like a governess buttons a coat on a child, who has an appointment with a puddle dot by the hearth is the spinning chair. It has a step for the foot that likes to be useful, and a rail for the hand that likes to rest while pretending to help. Frigg sits and draws the spindle into comfortable labor. The wool's been washed so thoroughly that even sheep would admire it. It smells faintly of grass with opinions. She spins thread that becomes rain cords, thin links that guide drops into neighborly lines. When the loom asks for company, she rises and answers. The warp is patient, the weft anecdotal. She weaves a strip of sky wide as a road you don't need directions for, and as calm as a library on a weekday afternoon. Sometimes she presses a pattern into the cloth that looks suspiciously like the rooflines of a village. If later in the week a cloud drifts over a village and decides to linger politely, you may thank the pattern for providing it with an itinerary. Frigg keeps a second ledger for weather, promises that prefer to be written down. She does not gossip with the future, only makes appointments. Morning haze for a valley that needs to practice being a lake without committing. A midday shade bar for a reaper's shoulders. 2 late afternoon breakthroughs of sun for lovers who agreed to walk whether or not the sky behaved. Her handwriting is the sort that children believe they could learn if someone showed them how to keep their elbows from galloping. In one margin, she notes a recipe for calm wind, 1 breath of old snow, 1 sigh of bread cooling, and in another margin, she draws a pocket for the day, so it has somewhere to put its keys, because the hall is a nation in miniature. Chores arrive the way citizens do, some speaking clearly, some mumbling, some expecting a parade. Frigg answers each with the same respect. She examines the underhem of a weather front and snips a loose thread before it can tangle the day. She rubs a bar of soap along the chalk line on a cloth that will become shade for a beekeeper. When she lifts it away, the cloth has learned a polite edge. She replaces the ribbon on a spindle that grew tired of its own color and cheers immediately upon promotion. She boils a kettle for tea and lets the steam audition for cloud duty. The steam, flattered, performs the role with humility. If you would like to participate from your pillow, choose one small thing around you and grant it a promotion. Pillows, for instance. Enjoy the title head archivist and behave accordingly. Sometime in the slow middle of day, a visitor arrives with the caution of a person who respects clean floors. It is a mortal woman from a farm where thunder has been acting important. She brings a gift of a linen towel that has learned over years how to apportion kindness. Frigg receives it with both hands and lays it on the table as if it were an honored guest. The woman describes her trouble, storm clouds standing on the hill like judges. Frigg nods. She takes from a drawer a small skein of rain cord and gives it to the woman with instructions to hang it above the threshold for one night, then carry it by the end to the hill and ask the clouds to be accountants rather than judges. Clouds excel at accounting, tallies, measures, inventories of drops, but the judging part tempts them into thunder. The woman practices the asking voice. It sounds exactly like someone offering a loan to a friend who has good intentions. She leaves with relief pressed into her shoulders and the towel remaining behind, already taking notes. The swans make a circuit of the green and approve of the drying progress by winding their necks into figure 8s. Frigg moves down the line of clouds with a stick of smooth ash, tapping each cloth lightly the way bakers test loaves. The ones that answer with an airy note are ready. She unpins and folds them into the basket in thirds, then in halves, because the sky prefers consistency when it is tired. A gust tries to be playful and nearly steals a cumulus, but the cloth remembers the pin's pinch and stays. Frigg smiles and offers the gust a chore, carry. This faint smell of soap to the far field, where people are building a fence too serious for summer. The gust agrees and goes off proudly to make the fence-friendlier dot in the sewing corner. A small miracle behaves itself. Frigg replaces a frayed tie on the hood that rainwear favors in villages with honest roofs. The new tie is the color of patience and slips through grommets with the ease of a good apology. She embroiders on a hem only birds will see, a short line in blue thread, be kind to low places. Birds are excellent readers. They mention the message to ditches, and ditches respond by encouraging water to visit evenly rather than passionately. She marks the end of her thread with a quiet knot and places the needle back in the cushion, where it stands with the posture of a guard who enjoys their post. Microfact for those still with us. Frigg nods by drawing the loop toward herself and whispering the word afterward. Because even knots appreciate chronology. Afternoon leans toward tea the way a sensible chair leans toward a table. Frigg sets the kettle near the embers and arranges cups that have never argued with each other. She pours for herself and, because hospitality is a reflex, pours for any god or mortal who might wander by in need of something warm and structured. Sometimes Odin passes, all ravens and road dust, and takes a cup without sitting because sitting would alert his thoughts that they could be comfortable. Sometimes Phila comes to discuss the budgets of baskets and advises a small investment in better handles across the hall. Today the guest is Saga, who brings a story about a lake that learned to listen so well it heard fish revise their plans. They sip, they edit tomorrow's clouds with calm conversation. The kettle sighs whenever an idea agrees to be realistic. Tea completes more weather than thunder ever will. Frigg believes in the value of inventories, so each afternoon she walks her storeroom with the pleasurable seriousness of a librarian. On the top shelf, folded fog. On the middle shelf, rain in 4 sizes, coaxing, persuading, insisting, and apologizing. On the lower shelf, extra shadows for backyards with ambitions. She listens to each bundle as if it were an instrument tuning itself. When a shadow hums too high, she adds a strand of dusk, and when fog hums too low, she invites it to remember the sea. In a chest, she keeps the fabric for halos, the shimmering edges that happen when sun shows humility behind a cloud. Halos are fragile, so she stores them between pages of a very large book of blank afternoons. If you ever see a halo and feel inexplicably organized, you know whose chest it came from. Toward evening, she changes the room's mood with small motions. The curtain is let down an inch, which recalibrates the light to a comfortable honesty. The hearth is encouraged to think about supper. Frigg returns to the green and retrieves the last of the cloud laundry, rolling the lines with a practiced hand until they look like spools of horizon. She thanks the posts for holding the day. Posts appreciate being thanked. They hold straighter for it. She carries the basket inside and stores the folded sky in its place. A draft wanders through the hall and discovers it is already welcomed. Drafts behave nicer when they are not treated like rumors. The swans tuck their heads under their wings, and the wind makes a polite bow and withdraws to consider the moon. Dinner time in Fensalir is plainly made. Bread that rests in slices like small promises. Butter that tastes of grass that believed in itself. A stew that tells a short story about roots. Frigg eats with the pace of a person who wants to remember her meal afterward. And afterward she writes 2 notes, one to herself about repairing the hem of a storm for next week, and one to the future requesting a morning not too attached to being spectacular. Even queens of the sky prefer a number of ordinary days. She lays her spoon on the table exactly parallel to the knife, because when utensils feel respected, they do not clatter at inopportune times. Night is not a curtain. Here so much as a tidy turning of pages. Frigg returns to the washing green with a lantern shaded on 3 sides, so the light behaves like a secret. She checks that the dew has raised itself to the correct height, just low enough to make grass conversational. She explains to the insects that tonight is for quiet work, and they honor her schedule with a restrained buzz. Back inside, she puts away the day in little parcels. The pins go in their bag. The stone goes to the windowsill where it can supervise dreams. The spool of raincord rides in the pocket of a door that shuts softly. because doors like to be given little jobs while they're not being doorstopped at her work table. The ledger waits like a lake in the evening. Frigg opens it and writes the day into it without blame or applause. Clouds washed and rehung, fog fitted with buttons, storm hemp trimmed, visitor reassured, tea successful. She adds a tiny drawing of a clothespin with wings because she knows humor keeps records better than solemnity. She closes the book with a palm across its cover as if smoothing a child's hair, and sets it under a smooth round weight carved with a rune that means here. The weight is important in a house that touches sky. It reminds papers that they belong to a table before they belong to drafts. When she prepares the bed, she shakes the linens once and squarely, and the linen answers with a softness that suggests they practice for hours. She tucks in the corners with the same respect she gave the cloud edges outside. There's a small basket at the foot, collected with the day's loose threads, because people carry stray threads at night, and it helps to give them somewhere agreeable to accumulate. She sits and unpins her hair, which has stored several opinions throughout the afternoon, and now lets them go with a sigh. From a hook above the headboard hangs a tiny sachet filled with dried thyme and 2 lavender heads that spent the summer believing they were a choir. The sachet tells the air to speak more quietly for a while. Before she sleeps, Frigg goes once more to the window. The green shines blackly. The swans are threads pulled through dark cloth. The sky is trying on stars in a manner both generous and careful. She reaches out and tugs the night 1 inch straighter where it has slouched near the horizon. It obliges and looks instantly more itself. She smiles. Somewhere far below, a farmer turns in bed and does not wake. But the field he loves gains a little more sleep, which will be noticeable in the morning when the light arrives gently and the soil remembers laughter. Frigg lowers the shade. She speaks to the tub, thank you, tomorrow again in the tub. Flattered to be remembered after hours, glints modestly. If you are still with us, you may adopt her last ritual. Choose one task you will not finish tonight and tell it, out loud or quietly, but it may continue in the morning without shame. You are not refusing it. You are putting it on the line among the cloud cloths, where it will dry into something easier. If sleep has already folded you in thirds and then halves, Frigg will pin the rest on your behalf. The basket will remember your name. The ledger will add your breath to its list of small weather events that improve the day. Nothing concludes. In Fensalir, the hum of clean things continues at a whisper, and the sky, well secured to its patient posts, turns slowly toward dawn. The cloud laundry dreams of traveling, and the fog buttons dream of being needed in towns where bakeries open early. The swans dream of one perfect oval drawn on water with no corrections. The pins snuggle in their bag and pretend to be birds roosting in a hedgerow. Frigg sleeps with one hand relaxed and one hand almost holding a spindle. The posture of someone who knows the morning will ask again for simple, dignified help, and who will offer it with a basket that never complains, a ledger that forgives, and a quiet that smells faintly of soap, meadow, and a queen's laughter kept neatly on a shelf where anyone can find it. You might not expect a goddess of stories to keep a mop, yet Saga does, and it has its own hook beside the shelves because even legends appreciate a dry floor. In Silkeveker, the river runs through the hall like a sentence that never hurries, and the tables are low and patient, built for cups that listen as well as mouths. Morning arrives as if it were a bookmark slipped between pages, and the lamps blink once and decide to be day. Saga moves through the hall with a cloth tucked at her belt and a pencil behind her ear that has learned the shape of thinking. She greets the rafters, which study the current like professors of quiet, and she taps the side of a clay jar to remind the Mead of Poetry that it is not required to be brilliant before breakfast. If you are still awake later, you can subscribe to her method by tapping one harmless object near you and telling it the day will not be dramatic. If sleep arrives before you choose an object, The river will choose a pebble for you and handle the paperwork. She begins with the catalog, because the catalog is how remembering gets its shoes on. The catalog is not a book, but a set of boards hinged together, each board rubbed with oil until it shines like a very sober idea. On these boards, Saga writes the titles of stories, or their shapes when titles have wandered off to think. A day when 3 loaves were enough for 6 people because they used small plates, she notes in a tidy hand. The knight in ore learned patience from a sandbar. The time a goat refused to be metaphoric. She files each phrase under a rune and hums to see if the rune agrees. Each morning, she chooses one shelf to straighten and one shelf to merely admire. Balance matters in libraries and in rivers. Today she admires the shelf of unfinished epics, where the spines are stout and courteous, holding enough for a nap and never demanding an oath. She straightens the slim folios of weather gossip, which are not history, but very entertaining. Somewhere beyond the doors, Odin clears his throat, perhaps practicing the tone in which he will claim he knew all this already. Saga smiles and sharpens her pencil to the length of a thumb joint, which is the respectable length for a day that means well. On the long central table lie small tools that have agreed not to be proud, a bundle of reed pens, a bowl of pumice for smoothing a story's rough edge, a little stamp shaped like a wave for marking pages that wish to come back to shore. And because this is a library with a sense of humor, a rubber intended for erasing spilled metaphors. She tests the reeds one by asking them to write the word hush. The best reeds write it so quietly the page blushes. The others are placed in a jar labeled for rivers, because river water knows how to improve a tool without teasing it. She flips open a book that has been sulking since late winter and smells the pages, which answer with the dry sweetness of straw, with a secret. She writes a small apology to the book for ignoring it, and then adds a footnote to herself reminding future Saga to read the sulk soon. Footnotes to self are like good neighbors. They ring the bell lightly and hold a pot with both hands. Visitors arrive early to Sourceless Story Hour, which meets whenever 2 chairs stand near a warm jug. The chairs have mellow manners. They contain more listening than would. A fisherman comes with a tale about a net that learned to be less literal. A girl brings the beginning of a sentence she found under the bridge. It reads, "Meanwhile, the spoon," and then stops, as such things often do. Saga pours a small cup of mead, no drama, just structure in liquid form, and invites the sentence to continue. It does not. Instead, the spoon rests, and the fisherman nods, because spoons and nets share a language of useful curves. Saga notes in the catalog, "Meanwhile, the spoon, resting period," and the board accepts the entry with a soft glow that might be oil or agreement. She reminds the room that not every story has ambitions. Some stories are excellent benches. The river participates with murmurs, which count as archival indexes in this hall. Saga keeps a slip of paper in her sleeve for river notes. Today it says pebbles satisfied, reeds taking attendance, 1 frog misquoted. She will correct the frog gently later with a leaf and an honest smile. While the fisher and the girl drink their small careful cups, she rearranges the basket of spare beginnings. The basket holds first lines that wandered in without blankets and were given a place to sleep. "Under the hill there is a door made of patience," says one. "The wind keeps a list of debts," says another. "A cloud sat down in a bowl," says a third, which is not actually a beginning but might be a recipe. Saga sorts them into 3 piles: useful soon, useful later, and charming but in need of a nap. The nap pile is warm and snores very softly. By mid-morning, the hall smells of pages breathing. Saga moves through the shelves with a bronze brush, sweeping dust into a pan that looks like a grin. The dustpan is officially retired smith work, still proud of curves and half-lights. She whispers the names of stories as she cleans. The coal that became polite, Sif's hair learns wind, the door that opened to the side. Names enjoy being spoken. It reminds them they are in service. A jar nearby holds the day's bookmarks lengths of ribbon dyed with river herbs, each one faintly green and faintly gold. She chooses 3 and tucks them into volumes that look thirsty for attention. She rolls up a map of islands that don't take sides and sets it into its tube, which accepts the duty like a well-raised citizen. The mop receives its turn, because even a simple floor hopes to be a mirror for the kind of footsteps that don't apologize for arriving quietly. Saga takes inventory of cups. Cups are important, more important than swords, in a room that believes in verbs like listen and pour. She counts them by weight on the hand, which is the proper way. You do not number cups the way you number stones. You number them the way you number good ideas. She sets one aside for Odin, who drinks like a field absorbs rain, slowly at first and then responsibly. She sets another for Frigg, who prefers her mead to rehearse restraint. She reserves a third for no one and everyone, a cup that sits on a little shelf by the door and gathers sighs. In this hall, sighs are considered a form of punctuation. At the river door she inspects the small threshold mat woven from dried rushes with a stubborn weft. The mat receives every wet foot and returns it as a dry thought. She shakes it once. It gives back 1 pebble and keeps 1, which is normal for a threshold. Then she turns to the scrolls of minor miracles and sorts them by temperature. Warm miracles include bread that becomes more generous as it cools and wool that admits it was wrong. Cool miracles include rain that keeps a promise to a single seed and the ability to sleep again after turning the pillow. For fun, she stamps 3 pages with the wave stamp and watches the ink try to imitate water. It fails, but with dignity. Around midday, Odin finally arrives with travel in his beard and a crow looking proud of its calendar skills. He salutes the river like a colleague who understands deadlines, then sits on the stool that has learned the politics of back support. Saga pours for him and sets a small dish of almonds beside the cup. He says nothing because the almonds in the cup make speech unnecessary for a while. Eventually, he produces a story like someone setting down a bundle. There was a hill, he begins, that moved 1 pace to the left to be closer to its reflection. Saga raises 1 eyebrow. She has already cataloged 2 versions of this, but she lets him proceed, because each telling balances the others, like stones in a good wall. He finishes, not with a flourish, but with a shrug that means hills will do as hills will do. She polishes his story with a reed pen, adding a slow sentence about the hill's shadow, taking adjustment like a neighbor learning a new schedule. Odin eats 3 almonds as if counting the measured patience of gods, and then he leaves a feather as fee. The feather goes into the jar of things given without being asked, a jar that glows faintly whenever someone remembers it exists. After he goes, the hall takes its long breath. Saga eats bread with cheese that thinks about caves and an apple that understands politely the meaning of sharpness. She reads half a page of a saga about a woven coat and then stops reading so the coat may finish itself. She has learned that some garments complete better when the reader leaves the room. She walks down the low corridor to the archive of untidy proverbs and stands at the door until the room arranges its shelves out of shame. The proverbs whisper admissions. The one about too many cooks has been misapplied. The one about stones and glass remembers a window, not a house. Saga nods. She writes a new note. Never throw a proverb when a ladle would do. She adds this to the catalog under today. Useful. Afternoon moves in, giggling quietly under its breath, and the river replies with a long answer about light. Saga prepares the lectern for transcribing. The lectern is carved from a straight-hearted tree and has been taught to support sentences without interpreting them. She dips a nib in slow ink and copies from a bundle of leaf letters sent by a valley. They tell about lambs learning to be napkins, about fence rails turning civil. about a rainstorm, deciding it was really a very large drink poured slowly. She copies without correcting, except to remove 2 excess heroics that snuck in behind the rain. Heroics are always trying to join the plain hours uninvited. On the margin, she draws a tiny boat. The boat smiles because boats are optimists. Several small worships occur at Skogvaker naturally, accidentally, like echoes. One is the ritual of the quiet ladder, which leans against a shelf and allows the feet of mortals to rise without thinking they are tall. Another is the ceremony of the spare chair. Whenever a new person comes in, a chair takes 1 step closer to an empty place and becomes available. Saga oversees these with the same management style she uses for rivers, offer boundaries, trust flow. She loans a volume of hearth sayings to an old woman who intends to read it to her bread. The book blushes, which is standard behavior for hearth sayings. Saga marks the loan with a pebble and the woman's soft name. Pebbles are reliable librarians. A squirrel appears on a beam to ask whether stories taste different when eaten standing up. Saga permits 1 small experiment and offers a page corner from the broken end of a badly behaved legend. The squirrel chews, considers, and declares it chewy with notes of old boots and bravado. Saga thanks it for its service and writes, "Noted, bravado becomes boot." She feeds the squirrel an almond in exchange for keeping its opinions away from manuscripts. Even gossip has rules here. The rules have manners. By late afternoon, the Mead of Poetry is awake and has learned to lean against the inside of its jug in a dignified way. Saga pours herself a sip and writes a miniature ode to tables. The ode fits on a thumb's length and tastes like patience warmed. She places the ode in a small frame on the wall between the window and the broom. The broom feels uplifted by the company of literature and promises to sweep more poetically. She tests that promise by scattering a few crumbs from the bread. The broom achieves a verse in 2 strokes. If you are still awake and holding a broom in your thoughts, praise its handle. Handles understand verses. Evening glides in below the floor as a deeper current, turning the room slow side down. Saga begins the closing routine. The catalog boards are folded like a sleepy accordion. 2 cups are placed upside down for tomorrow to discover renewed purpose. The mop checks its own posture in the window and puts itself away without insistence. She takes the basket of spare beginnings and spreads them on the table, letting them stretch the way cats stretch when no one is trying to be impressed. She chooses 1. There is a door made of patience, and gives it a little nudge with her pen. At once it grows a hinge, then a keyhole, then a perfectly sensible threshold with a mat that says welcome if you mean it. She nods and writes a line to hold the place. Somewhere, a farmer halfway to sleep imagines a door and will, upon waking, find today easier to open than he expected. This is how the hall pays its taxes to the world. She steps outside to the river porch with a lamp. The lamp's glass is clean and the flame is well behaved. The porch rail has grooves from 100 elbows and enjoys the feeling of responsibility. Saga pours a dipper of water and returns it to the river as a thank you for indexing the day. The river accepts and returns as a receipt a reed that looks like a letter. She slots the reed beside the door where tomorrow's wind will sign it. A pair of small fish turn in place with the poise of librarians shelving light. She praises them without raising her voice, and they accept their compliments modestly. Back in the hall, she adjusts the benches to face each other because furniture likes conversation even when people are gone. She refills the sand jar at the end of the writing table, smoothing its top with the flat of her hand until it looks like a piece of comb. She takes the mop down again and touches a corner under the shelf because mops are happiest when they have performed one last kindness. The mop returns to its hook like a professional finishing a sentence. She sits a moment with the ledger. Today's entry reads, "Dust conversant, cups coherent, river friendly, Odin feathered, spoon resting, Squirrel advisory boot, beginnings encouraged. She draws a very small wave and a smaller boat beneath it, as if the wave were offering the boat a ride and the boat had learned how to accept help. A few last visitors drift through as the light thins into gentleness. An elderly couple who share one story between them and prefer to borrow a second for nights when the first is tired. A young man who wishes to exchange his youthful epic for a shorter, truer thing he can use tomorrow. Saga trades him a paragraph for the epic, which the hall will dilute into sensible portions over the winter. She gives them each a ribbon bookmark and the instruction to return the story with notes about where it breathed deeply. They agree, relieved, as if absolved of an assignment. The hall seems to grow a size larger whenever people leave easier than they came. Night begins the way a book ends, without stopping, just softening into after. Saga closes the river door and sets the bar that the wood prefers. Bars like exact fits. She snuffs the lamps with a motion that resembles kindness more than dismissal, and leaves one small flame near the shelves of children's tailies, because small flames like heroes who go to bed on time. She covers the jug of mead with a cloth that is embroidered along its hem the words, "Keep your secrets," gently. She gathers the basket of spare beginnings and slips it beneath the table where the floor keeps, sleepers cool and patient. Before she goes to her own pillow, Saga takes one last walk along the shelves and touches the spines with 3 fingers. She does not do this to prove ownership. She does it the way a gardener touches leaves at dusk. The books reply with the faintest rustle, pages adjusting themselves for dream weather. She stands at the catalog and adds one more line not intended for anybody else. The day learned how to turn without creaking. Then she closes the boards and ties them with a ribbon that remembers every knot. If you are still listening, you can use the library's custom for sleep. Choose a single sentence you like today, or even half of one, and place it on the shelf behind your eyes. Do not tidy it. Do not force it to end. Let the river file it under a rune you don't need to learn. Sleep will borrow it and return it with small, polite improvements. If you have drifted already, the shelf behind your eyes is still open. Saga will slide a sentence into it, perhaps the one about the spoon, or perhaps just the word hush written so quietly that your breath falls into step beside it. Nothing concludes at Skokvaker. The river continues spelling its slow alphabet against the stones. The moth dreams of rain that will be proud to be let in. The cups consider the work of tomorrow and decide it can be done with fewer adjectives than yesterday. The catalog sleeps folded, certain that stories prefer darkness after they have been brave enough to be day. Saga rests with her hands folded like pages, a pencil lying where it can hear her breathing, ready for any night thought that asks to be more than a visitor. And you, somewhere between the wave stamp and the reed pen, float on the long sentence the hall speaks into the dark. A sentence with no urgency and excellent posture. A sentence that promises only this: there will be another page in the morning, and it will open quietly. You might not expect the watchman of the gods to own a lint brush, yet Heimdall does, and he uses it on the rainbow, as if color were a coat that wants to look presentable for travelers who may or may not arrive. The frost wakes like a careful yawn, each band of light opening one eye, then the next, then deciding to be a road. The bridge is quiet even when it glows. It hums the way a kettle does when it knows tea will be requested, but is not in a rush to boil. Heimdall steps onto the first red plank, and the plank politely strengthens under his weight, not because it must, but because it prefers to. He taps the railing with 2 fingers, and the railing replies with a small, dignified chime of a guard who has finished polishing a buckle. If you are still awake later, feel free to adopt his ritual and tap the edge of your blanket twice. If sleep catches you before the second tap, the blanket will perform both taps on your behalf and call it good security. His morning begins with listening not for danger, but for tone. Stories say Heimdall hears grass grow, which is true but unhelpful unless one is interested in botany at an intimate volume. What he really listens for is mood. He stands at the crown of the bridge, where the bands overlap into a soft white you could mistake for a thoughtful cloud. He closes one eye, then the other, bringing the world into focus not with sight but with patience. Sound derives from the 9 realms, as if each had a favorite instrument and had agreed to practice without applause. Midgard conducts itself in petals, broom bristles, door latches, and a surprising amount of bread cooling. Jotunheim sends long notes shaped like hills that have decided not to move today. Alfheim delivers the flicker of needles, mending small tears in summer. Niflheim remains conservative, offering the slow creak of cold learning to be comfortable. Each sound is sorted into baskets in his head labeled continue, improve, and better in the afternoon. The basket called improve contains, for example, a gate that squeals in a tone unbecoming to a village committed to neighborliness. He notes it and leans a fraction toward Midgard, which is how he mails a suggestion without inconveniencing the wind. When ears are satisfied with the world's temperature, Heimdall tends to the horn, because a horn that waits must be reminded that waiting is an art. Jallarhorn rests beside a post in a cradle made by a dwarf who believed all important objects should sleep well. Heimdall lifts it like someone lifting a promise to the light and breathes through it lightly, not to sound an alarm, but to keep the air inside honest. A thin tone threads the bridge, so narrow you could balance a thought on it. Birds turn their heads and decide the day has begun. He warms the horn by rubbing it with a cloth woven from sleep that goats brave to donate. The cloth smells faintly of hay and pride. He checks the mouth like a baker checks an oven and checks the bell like a miller checks the wheel. Satisfied, he sets Jallarhorn back in its cradle and promises it a long, uneventful afternoon. The horn is pleased. Instruments are braver when they know they are not needed. He sweeps Bifrost with the lint brush, though no lint appears. The brush arrests stray fog before it can settle into a bad habit, and it smooths the passage for gods who dislike surprises underfoot. Sometimes he finds a tiny feather left by a sky that enjoyed itself too much. He stores these in a jar labeled for later beauty. The jar lives under the bench where he keeps a coil of rope braided from the hair of wind, which is the sort of rope that never tangles but enjoys pretending. Heimdall checks the bolts that anchor the bridge where it touches the air. The bolts have names: Steadfast, Courteous, Continue, and he greets each. Steadfast offers silence, Courteous offers a small sheen, Continue responds with a tremble that is entirely professional. He marks in his ledger a note about the yellow band showing generous behavior near noon, and he thanks the blue band for staying cool next to red in a manner that displays emotional intelligence. Midday, on the rainbow, is work of a different slowness. Travelers from Midgard sometimes approach the foot of Bifrost with the seriousness of people who have washed their hands twice and are wondering if a third time would be correct. Heimdall speaks to them through the weight of the air rather than with words. He loosens the red so it looks inviting. He tightens the green so it appears reliable. He polishes the violet so it feels like a bow. The travelers feel better and, not knowing why, decide that today is for ordinary duties, which are the kind that make the world run. Occasionally, Thor stamps across with a thunderhead following him like a large but well-behaved dog. Heimdall nods and lightly combs the yellow back into shape after the boot prints have made their point. Once in a while, Loki wanders past, carrying an expression he clearly borrowed. Heimdall adjusts the bridge to reflect him slightly askew, as mirrors do when they prefer honesty. Loki grins at the trick like a student who recognizes the teacher's handwriting and leaves without misplacing anything important. These are all transactions of tone, and tone is the currency of peace. He shares lunch with the rainbow, because eating alone at work suggests an unbalanced schedule. Today's meal is bread that pretends to be a small hill, cheese with the memory of a patient cow, and an apple that thinks Christmas should arrive without ceremony. He breaks the bread onto the rail in 3 fair pieces and tells the bridge it may choose. The red takes a crumb and becomes, for a moment, the exact color of human happiness after a good loaf. The yellow refuses, wanting only light. The blue accepts the smallest bit politely and holds it until a gull appears. Gulls always know where blue is generous. Heimdall takes the last piece, which tastes like the sound of a door closing in good weather. He drinks water from a skin that has learned diplomacy, for it tastes equally friendly in summer and winter. Afterward, he writes in the ledger, not to remember, but to give the day the dignity of footnotes. Lunch, competent. Bridge, cooperative. Gall, moderate. World, leaning toward bearable. Afternoon, spring inspection, which is different from vigilance. Vigilance looks outward and is good at knees. Inspection looks along and is good at elbows. Heimdall walks the rainbow with the easy gait of someone who trusts his shoes, pausing at each join. He listens for questions. The red asks, do I flare enough for festivals without embarrassing weekdays? The orange asks, am I visible to bees? The green, dependable creature asks only whether children will feel safe placing both feet on it. Heimdall pats it and says yes. The blue whispers about sailors. The indigo explains itself to no one and does just as much as it must. Violet wonders if it is allowed to be a little dramatic now and then. Heimdall, who sees the value in quiet spectacle, approves a measured amount of flourish in the hour before dusk, the way one might allow a collar to have a stylish button. He adjusts the tension where red and blue negotiate their border, and the negotiation proceeds kindly. On the eastern end, there is a bench built from sky that retired. Sky, after a long career, appreciates being sat upon. Heimdall sits and opens his repair kit. Inside are tools modest as good words, a narrow file for smoothing the edge of a glare, a dab of rain for places where color has dried too stiff, a small bone needle for stitching a fray along the green's hem, wax for calming a squeak that has found an echo and grown proud. He mends not because the bridge is weak, but because care is most itself when nothing is urgent. While he works, he tells the railing a short story about a wind that went to see the sea and returned with better manners. The railing, which is wise, does not laugh. It simply gets stronger. Toward evening, the sounds of the worlds change shape. The way soup settles into knowing what it is. Midgard becomes more spoon than hammer. Asgard itself quiets. You can tell when Odin is thinking because the air grows intent but not heavy, like it's reading a map. Heimdall marks each change, not to predict, but to engage in conversation. He invites the bridge to lower its brightness by one polite notch so that stargazers in every realm feel respected. The bridge obliges, all bands breathing at once like a choir remembering their inhalation together. During this dimming, he tends to the animal tracks that occasionally find their way onto the color, fox pads that arrived with curiosity, cat prints that appear without explanation, and once, a very faint suggestion of hooves that may have belonged to an opinionated goat. He buffs them out during the quiet hour and leaves the surface even, because the next day deserves a clean field. His evening ritual is gentle and full of peculiar tools. There is the small crystal he uses to test whether Violet is too proud. If the crystal blushes, he tells Violet a humble story until it relaxes. There is the yard of plain linen, with which he covers the central seam, so the bridge may consider privacy while it rests. There's the box of spare edges, soft triangles of dusk, squares of morning, a single circle cut from a fog that agreed to be practical. From these, he selects what the bridge might like to wear tomorrow, as a cook chooses herbs with the intention of steady cheer rather than fireworks. He oils the posts, paying special attention to the grain where knots have histories. He rotates the jar of sky feathers and removes one to place under the cradle of the horn, a small comfort for the instrument, like an extra pillow for a guest who confesses they like two. From the west comes a scent that means Rain is writing an essay and would prefer to be left alone. Heimdall nods, allowing it privacy. Sometimes just after sunset, a delegation of mundane sounds arrives to report. Today it is 3 door hinges from Midgard that have practiced lowering their voices, an oar that feels ready to apologize for yesterday's impatience, and a faint note from a kettle that overachieved. Heimdall listens with the gravity of a judge whose court never punishes. He gives each a short, kind sentence, to the hinges, a drop of oil, and the instruction to listen to the wood they serve. To the oar, a promise that water forgives competence. To the kettle, a reminder that steam is a limit as well as a skill. They leave satisfied, and he writes a line in his ledger, civilian correspondence completed, notes delivered by air with excellent posture. Night arranges itself along the rail. Stars begin their shift, professional and quiet. Heimdall lights the small lantern that lives just under the bench, its glass smoked on one corner, a detail he has never cleaned because it keeps the light from bragging. He walks the length of Bifrost and checks the seam at each end where reality begins again. The seam is straight. He tests the echo by speaking the name of a city in Midgard that has agreed to remain anonymous. The echo returns with the accent of contentment. He tightens the strap on the horn's cradle and tells it a bedtime fact. In the morning, dew will draw a line across red, exactly the width of a promise kept. The horn approves with the faintest low note, something like a big cat deciding not to move. Meals arrive late when you guard the evening. He takes his supper from a basket brought by an orderly wind. The wind enjoys errands. It ties a knot in the handle to prove delivery and then wanders off to rotate flags gently, not as orders but as suggestions. Supper is barley porridge that knows the history of spoons and a chunk of smoked fish that tells a persuasive story about rivers. He eats standing at the crown of the bridge, watching the 9 realms exhale. He tastes carefully to be sure the fish does not overshadow the porridge. It does not. Balance is the principle of the watch. He pours a little water along the rail for luck. The water, liking its brief career as a blessing, shivers with pride and becomes part of the rainbow for a heartbeat, but then continues as itself. There is an hour between the last errand of the evening and the first promise of the night when Heimdall practices the calm that keeps his hearing generous. He calls this practice polishing the quiet. He does it by remembering 10 small noises and setting them in order before him, like stones on the shore. Today he chooses the click of a latch in a village where someone decided to forgive, the whisper of a sleeping child turning the page of a dream, the tender complaint of leather accepting a foot, the baritone of a contented ox, the tiny applause of fins near a pier, the sensible percussion of bread cut with a satisfied knife, the little march of raindrops crossing a window, the deep hush of snow reshelving sound, the low happiness of a kettle ready but waiting, and the very soft sigh of pillows agreeing with necks. He lines them up across the color and nods to each. Sound nods back, flattered to be considered. If you are still with us, you can adopt a version of this practice without leaving your bed. Choose 2 or 3 small noises from your day and place them like pebbles at the edge of your breath. You do not need to polish them. They will brighten on their own, if sleep arrives while you choose. Heimdall will choose on your behalf and arrange the pebbles along the bridge where thoughts cross over into dreams with their shoes in their hands. The night deepens in steps, not leaps. Stars add a second layer like careful stitching. Bifrost lowers its pulse until it blends with the heartbeat of what it holds. In the second quiet, the animals speak in contracts rather than conversations. A fox lists its needs. An owl lists its offers. Both lists fit neatly on a leaf. Heimdall reviews the lines of the contract and approves without edits. He returns to the bench and closes the ledger. The ledger is heavy not with drama but with accuracy, and accuracy sleeps well. He tucks a feather under the strap to mark the day and sets the book beside the jar, where later feathers can gossip about page numbers. While remaining essentially useful, he prepares the bridge for rest by drawing a line of shadow down the center, very thin. It is not to divide, but to indicate that even light appreciates knowing which side to lie on. He thinks each band by name, the way a careful host thinks chairs after guests leave. Red enjoys gratitude. It warms slightly. Yellow bows. Blue nods, serious as a river that has decided not to argue with rocks tonight. He tells Violet a joke so small it cannot be repeated, and the color relaxes, dramatic in a well-behaved way. The posts receive a goodnight knock steady and promise to remain exactly themselves in any weather. The horn, last of all, is covered with the linen and dreams of one clear note that might never be needed. Which is the best kind of dream for a horn? Heimdall's own bed is a narrow place beside the western post, built of wood that appreciates long duty. He sleeps with one ear on the bridge and one ear on the world, a position he learned on page 2 of the Watchman's Manual and never had cause to revise. Before he lies down, he looks across the 9 realms and performs the smallest roll call. He says in order, rest, 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 and the realms, good students tonight, answer with the mild commotion of comfort seeking itself. He smiles and loosens his belt, which has dutifully kept its conversations short all day. He places his boots where the bridge can see them so that color will remember the weight it carries is measured in kind. Nothing concludes. Under his watch. It only eases into later. The bridge, tidied and content, breathes like a library after closing. The wind signs the reed it forgot to sign earlier. A distant city forgets to worry and remembers to lock the window against nothing in particular. The gull who ate the crumbs sleeps with its beak under its wing and dreams of blue behaving itself. In the jar, the feathers consider tomorrow and decide they will be sufficient. In the cradle, the horn is quiet but alert in the way of instruments who know they are needed exactly by not being used. And somewhere just beyond the last bright plank, where footsteps arrive softer than intentions, your own breath meets the hum of the bridge and discovers it can slow one notch more, then another, until even the colors seem to lie down beside you, keeping watch without urgency, waiting with long, friendly patience for morning to begin politely again. You might not expect eternal youth to squeak, yet in the Dun's pantry, the apples sometimes make a tiny sound when she turns them, a polite little chirp of wax and wood, as if forever were adjusting its chair. Dusk slides along the orchard like a cat learning to tiptoe, and Idun walks the rows with a basket on one arm and a soft brush in her hand that remembers the shape of blossom weather. The trees are calm, which is their way of being proud, and the grass has that evening habit of thinking it is shorter than it was at noon. Birds perform their last sensible errands, not for music but for inventory. Idun pauses beside the tree that likes stories and tells it the smallest one she knows. Today, a bee corrected a breeze. The tree approves by barely moving. If you're somehow still awake in a few minutes, you can follow her method and tell an object near you a story with no villain. If you drift off before you pick an object, the nearest shadow will volunteer and keep your secret properly dull. She has 3 baskets, and they have manners. The first basket is for now, the second is for visitors who say they're just looking, and the third is for later, which is a length of time the gods respect without defining. Each basket is named on its handle in runes that prefer round shapes. The runes hum when the baskets are empty and go to sleep when the baskets are full, which is exactly opposite to people and therefore useful. Idun's brush is made from the hair of a very patient goat who signed a contract allowing one haircut per spring and a modest compliment each autumn. She uses the brush to lift dust off the skins so the apples can remember they were flowers first. A few apples carry freckles like kindly constellations. She never polishes freckles away. Freckles are the way sweetness practices punctuation. Under the nearest tree, a small crate holds tags and string, because immortality, like laundry, appreciates labeling. Tonight's first tag reads, "Sweetness leaning left," which is a subtle way of saying the fruit would prefer to be eaten with the right side of the mouth. Along the western wall of the orchard runs a channel where bees gossip after hours. They do not discuss nectar. They discuss traffic patterns and the ethics of shortcutting across sage leaves. Idun listens politely. It's said in certain stories that the apples keep the gods young in one bite, but in practice it's more administrative. A thin slice strengthens the knees, a second keeps the eyebrows symmetrical, and a third whispers to the voice that no one expects a speech after supper. She measures out these slices later with a small knife that knows all the ways a hand can be careful. For now she walks, and the orchard acknowledges her with a smell halfway between honey and clean linen, which is the odor patience gives off when it is pleased. She tests the weight of an apple and notes that it is exactly a promise and a thimble, which is how you say, ripe without waking the moon. The path that leads to the cellar is fitted with flat stones that have learned not to argue with shoes. At the door, she dries her palms on a towel embroidered with a sprig of thyme, and the words do not hurry the shelf. The cellar is cool the way old advice is cool. Jars traded for favors line one wall pear syrup with a serious look, cloudberry jam that has read more poetry than necessary, and a small regiment of vinegar bottles that believe they are philosophers. Shelves under the stair hold wooden trays with shallow sides. Each tray has its nap of straw, and each straw has decided its purpose is to cradle rather than to scratch. Idun sets the first basket down and begins the sorting that makes the night feel employed. The rule is simple. Apples that feel like good decisions to the left, apples that feel like conversations to the right, and the rare apple that feels like a memory into the middle where it can think. She taps one and listens. A ripe apple answers with the tone of a drum that has learned whispering. She writes small notes as she goes, cheerful, good with rain, ask Frigg about wool, and tucks the notes under the nearest tray corner, where paper enjoys the company of wood. On the back table sits the ledger of seeds, a book broader than a hand and just as warm. No one sees this ledger except Idun and the occasional respectable moth. It records not the number of apples, which come and go like plans, but the number of seeds that wish to be counted. Idun believes every seed intends a conversation. She breaks an apple cleanly in two and shows it the daylight. The seeds blink like small, polite eyes. With a spoon, she lifts them out into a saucer, counting in a steady rhythm that matches the river outside when the river is in a mood to be domestic. Most apples share 5 seeds, which is a comfortable odd number, like chairs around a small table in late afternoon. She writes down the tallies in a hand that makes even the numeral 7 feel welcome. The law of the cellar is balanced generosity. 1 seed put aside for planning, the rest returned to the ledger's envelope, which is labeled future afternoons. There is nothing urgent in her method. Even the moth leans in to watch, the way a neighbor leans over a fence to observe a garden quietly prospering. Between tasks, she pours a cup of water from the clay jug that sighs when lifted. Not from exhaustion, but from a belief that sighs belong everywhere. The water tastes of pebbles that have studied sunlight. She drinks, then dips the brush again and resumes the turning of apples. Somewhere above the cellar, a fox counts its steps along the fence and decides not to count farther. Somewhere under the step, a spider pulls one more line into place and then stops. satisfied with geometry at its current address. Idun whispers thanks to all local categories of patience. She makes her way to the shelf of guests, where she keeps the apples that will sit on tables and learn to be decorative without feeling used. Guests are labeled not by name, but by the sound their footsteps make. A slow walker receives an apple with the echo of evening. A quick walker receives one with the snap of a twig that enjoyed being stepped on. It does not change the taste, only the conversation between teeth and thought. A little bell on the pantry door rings once by itself. The draft has the manners of a messenger. Idun glances at the bell and smiles. She has been meaning to oil the clapper with a dab of beeswax, not to silence it, but to teach it to complement the night. She sets down the brush and picks up the small tin labeled Yes Wax. The tin lid fits like a good idea. With a fingertip, she smooths a whisper of wax along the bell's hinge. The next test ring sounds less like a question and more like a nod, which is precisely what she wanted. Maintenance is rest's older sibling. A goddess may promise the return of spring every time, but the bell is what keeps the promise from startling anyone on the way. Now and then a god knocks, not for ceremony, just for slices. Tonight it is Tyr, who lost a hand to a wolf and gained, in exchange, a remarkable calm about portion sizes. He stands at the top of the cellar stairs because everyone believes youth is kept cool. Idun greets him the way bread greets butter, politely and without notes. She measures him 2 slices and a third, for steadiness, she says, and he eats them as one eats a memory, thoughtfully. They discuss the weather with the relaxed accuracy of people who work outdoors. Tyr remarks that apples, when cut precisely, resemble shields if shields were kind. Idun points out that shields would do well to learn from fruit how to bruise discreetly. He nods, thanks her, and goes the way measured men go, with footsteps that end at the door and do not need to be watched out later. Odin comes by in the manner of a rumor deciding to be factual. He leaves his spear leaning against the wall because spears and apples should never argue. He accepts one slice and looks at it with his one good eye as if it were a map of polite countries. Idun gives him a second slice without being asked, and he eats, both like someone who intends to live long enough to apologize for things properly. He offers a feather as payment, which is traditional for him, and she sets it into a jar marked feathers meant well. Jar and feather both appear relieved. Any news from the road? She asks, and Odin answers in a level voice that there's always a road, and it always has news, which is an efficient way to be vague. Remember to sleep on both sides, she suggests, so you don't dream unevenly. He smiles in that way chiefs smile when someone has polished truth until it reflects tranquility and then leaves her to the ledgers. The last crate tonight holds apples with complicated minds. These are the fruits that roll slightly in their sleep and prefer to be placed with the stem pointing toward a wall. Idun talks to them about reasonable goals. You will be eaten, she says, and that is not an insult. It is an invitation to take part in the dependable part of miracle. She demonstrates how the knife enters at a respectful angle. She shows the paper how to accept juice stains without commentary. She asks the air to be a bit cooler, and the air, liking to be asked well, obliges. She writes a new tag, good for memory, that begins with boots, which is a polite way of saying this apple will help people recall where they left their shoes beside the bed dot in a corner sits. The small barrel of cider that has chosen not to be wine. Cider is the beverage that believes there is exactly enough day. Idun draws a thimbleful and gives it to the floor, a toast in honor of gravity. The floor appreciates libations that do not cause it work. Somewhere above, the moon steps onto its balcony and leans over the orchard, counting trees as if counting sheep. Idun tidies the last tray, tucking 2 apples under a folded cloth so that Christmas can practice patience without performing. She adds a line to the ledger of seeds. 4 families agreed to wait. Seeds love to be called families. It makes them sit up with better posture inside their envelopes. She carries a small bowl of peelings to the back door and sets them on the stone for night creatures who prefer simple opinions. The peelings curl slowly the way a nap begins. On her way back, she pauses at the shelf of tools and taps each handle once with the brush. Tools enjoy acknowledgement. It keeps them from boasting about their usefulness at awkward times. Her knife, tidy as a thought well concluded, slides into its sheath and becomes a polite line. The jug sighs again, content that water has completed its evening obligations. The moth reads over her shoulder one more moment, and then closes its wings with the sound of a page being tucked in. Adun has one last duty, a quiet ritual nobody notices unless they happen to stand near a word. She chooses a single apple that did not quite belong to any tray and carries it into the orchard. She places it on the stump that used to be a tree and now enjoys the responsibilities of furniture. She tells the apple, "Thank you for participating in the experiment of time," which is the sentence that closes the ledger of day. Then she steps back and lets the night adjust its blankets. In the hedge, a hedgehog performs its one trick, being exactly itself, and the night applauds by continuing to be night. If you want to adopt her habit for sleep, you can invent a small ledger behind your eyes. Write in it with breath. One line will do. Something about today that agreed to be ordinary. A cup, a door that behaved. A sock with a sense of direction. If you fall asleep before choosing, the ledger will select on your behalf, and you will wake to find you have remembered something calm without knowing why. That is Idun's favorite kind of memory, the useful one that slides into your pocket by itself. She returns to the cellar, dimming the lamp with 2 twists because 2 is the number that teaches 3 how to wait. She lays the brush on its cloth, the cloth on its shelf, the shelf in its mood. She turns the baskets so that tomorrow we'll find them at a friendly angle. She ties the ledger with a ribbon dyed the color of a pleasant conversation. She closes the door in such a way that the latch becomes a part of the sentence rather than the period. Outside, the orchard exhales slowly, the way a choir puts down its notes and keeps only the breath. Apple's round little clocks settle their ticking to match the planet. Nothing is concluded. It is only arranged for later. The bees stop talking and begin resting. They look like commas in the dark. Adun walks to her bed among the herbs, where mint speaks softly about order and chamomile explains the theory of cups. She loosens her hair and it remembers sunlight without making a fuss. She lies down with the patient comfort of a stone that has learned the river's name and decides to trust it. Somewhere a god finishes an apple slice and finds their eyelids politely heavy. Somewhere a weary horse leans into a manger and feels its day placed neatly on a shelf. Somewhere a small promise remembers it is welcome to be small. And you, writing the slow rhythm of the cellar, the brush, the bell, and the ledger, move along the shelves of your own quiet orchard until the labels all read the same word, which is rest. Written so gently that every seed inside it agrees to wait for morning and grow only as fast as a yawn.